Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start, can I just run round to make sure everybody's hooked up?
Reboot your comment.
So if we start from Councillor Scandrett. Are you there, Councillor Scandrett? Councillor Scandrett? Councillor Turland? Councillor Turland?
He's got.
Yep, you all right? No, I just want to get everybody to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson? Councillor Nelson? Councillor Nelson, are you there? Councillor Nelson, I know you're there. I saw you, saw the camera on. Yes, are you there, Councillor Nelson?
Yes, hello.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews?
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Going around the table, Councillor Whipper?
Good evening. How is everyone going?
Thanks, Larry. Councillor Halstead? You there, Councillor Halstead?
No, Councillor Houston is giving his apology through me to now. He won't be at the meeting today.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Councillor Markward?
You need to take him
Councillor Markward?
You need to
Unmute yourself. Councillor Markward?
I'm here. I couldn't, the unmute wasn't working. I was muted by the system. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor McLaughlin?
I can hear you fine, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, I haven't got my camera working. I can see everyone here. So what I'm going to have to do, I just told John Crawford, I'll shut down my computer, my laptop, and reboot it and try again. For some reason, I've got everyone here. Sounds fine, but the camera hasn't opened up. So I'll
go to your iPad, Graham. Put it on your iPad like everybody else.
Okay.
I'll try this first. I won't be long. I'll be back with you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Scandrett.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Just checking to make sure everyone is audible and on view. So we have, if there's no other ones to come on, noting that Councillor Halstead will be an apology, then we will start the meeting. Now, obviously, we're in a situation, so nobody stands. We will acknowledge country. I'll do acknowledgement of country this week, and then as from next week, we'll go around the table as per normal, starting with Councillor Scandrett. So, just doing the acknowledgement of country, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are meeting on today and pay my respects to elders both past and present, and also that respect to any Torres Strait or Aboriginal people present today. Again, we don't have the opening prayer. I'll read the civic prayer. Almighty God, from whom comes every good and perfect gift, we give you thanks for the blessings you bestow upon us in this Shire. Grant to those who hold office in this council the spirit of justice and truth, of wisdom and charity, that mindful of our responsibilities, we may promote the welfare of your people and advance the common good. Amen. Apologies. Councillor Halstead, moved by Councillor Turland, seconded. Councillor Scandrett. Any comment? Put that all in favour. Those against, carry.
We had some people that wanted to speak.
We are in meeting, so we're in a formal meeting of council. So we move to the adoption of previous minutes, ordinary meeting on the 25th of March 2020. Somebody who would like to move those minutes? Can you put your hand to the camera? Thank you, Councillor Markward. Second, Councillor Whipper. Any discussion on the correctness of the minutes? Then I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand to the camera. Carried. We now move on to the minutes of the emergency extraordinary meeting held on the 27th of March. Somebody like to move the minutes on that? Councillor Markward, seconded Councillor Andrews. Is there any discussion on the correctness of the minutes? Councillor Turland, you are on mute. Councillor Turland.
The question is, item 5 in the business paper says it's an extraordinary meeting. It was an emergency extraordinary meeting, I understand.
Yes, I contacted the Office of Local Government in respect to the reason why it was classified that way is because the normal 3-day notice was not required under the emergency decree as a pandemic. As such, the Office of Local Government said you do not have to wait the 3 days, which turned out the best thing because we couldn't have held it. That's why it was held on the Friday with consent and concurrence with the Office of Local Government.
That's not what I'm saying. Item 5 extraordinary meeting, not emergency extraordinary meeting in the document here in front of me. So is it an extraordinary meeting or an emergency extraordinary meeting? It's not in this document. That's what I'm getting at.
It was if you want to go for the terminology, it was an extraordinary meeting under an emergency situation. Okay, any further on the correctness? Then I put the minutes. All in favour, please put your hand towards the screen. Councillors, yes, we have a majority. Those against, Councillor Turland and Scandron. Now, we move on to the declarations of interest. Anybody with declarations of interest? You've had the form. So any declarations of interest? Councillor, no?
Yes, Councillor Turland.
Councillor Turland, do you have a declaration of interest?
I'll think about that through the day, thank you.
It would be good if you, at the beginning of the meeting, if you know you have a declaration of interest, then it should be declared at the beginning. Okay, we go on to the mayoral minute, and that is in relation to the mayoral minute and the federal and state government's COVID-19 financial support. Would somebody move that, or would you counsel?
Question, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Turland.
That's me.
Question.
Councillor Turland.
Yeah, item 2, that council calls for the package. Council's call for the package. Increased funding assistance for grants of payments of 1% to help councils maintain essential functions and services. Acknowledging increasing cost and mounting of revenue loss associated with COVID-19 and drought and bushfire, as well as the giving council the capacity to provide hardship assistance to businesses and residents. Can you explain what sort of money you believe council has lost in relation to item 2 of this document?
Well, that will probably be more apparent next week when we have the financial finance meeting, and then we go into a workshop for councillors. So no, I can't answer that in a definitive manner, and that will be hopefully a more substantive notice will be able to be given next week.
Well, but the item says to give councils capacity to provide hardship assistance to businesses and residents.
Can I?
We're providing nothing, but we're not going to charge interest.
No, it's not correct, Councillor Turland. If you remember, we have something further in the business paper that we've already done. So
I get that, Dan.
Thank you.
I make a comment.
The General Manager would like to comment.
I don't know if I can be heard, but I'll try. This is a standard worded mayoral minute that has been asked by local government New South Wales to be adopted by every council as it is here right now. So this isn't something that we've put together ourselves. It is a request from LG New South Wales for all councils to adopt this standard mayoral minute.
I think that was also explained on Monday when we ran through it, that this came from the LGA, and that is why it's been put forward. So everybody's on the same page requesting financial assistance from state and federal government. Okay, any further Councillor Scandrett?
Need to move it and second it.
Do we have a mover and seconder first before we take questions? Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor.
Yes, happy to move.
Councillor Scandrett.
You've already moved and seconded it.
Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Scandrett.
Microphone, that's better. My microphone was locked on, Mr. Mayor, by whoever's controlling it at council. My question, sorry, that's the cat. I've never seen the cat have a reaction like that, you know that.
Well, I've never seen a cat out of the bag before either, Councillor.
You might in your future, yes. Anyway, there we go. What direct costs have we had in terms of staff as a result of COVID-19 at this point? Is there a general comment the GM could give us?
Look, at this stage, as I said, I'm only it's a guesstimate. Hopefully, as I say, the finance meeting next week and then the councillor workshop, there will be definitive amounts given to councillors. But at this stage, it would be inappropriate to take a guess at, without that knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No further debate, then I put the mayoral minute. All in favour, please put your hand to the camera. Councillors, yes. Majority, actually it was everyone. So we move on to 9.1. No, we have public forum. Item 8, in relation to notice of motion 920-2020, letter of appreciation to Mittagong Airfield Committees. Mr. Chris Byrne will address council in support of the motion. So if we can get him out of the lobby. Welcome, Mr. Byrne. You there? You there, Mr. Byrne?
I am, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I am.
Good. We can see you loud and clear. We know exactly where you are with the signage behind you.
Oh, very good. I thought I'd put that there especially for you.
The floor is open to you, and you know the time frame. So, welcome to the first COVID-19 live streaming council meeting. You can put that one in your diary.
I will indeed. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to speak in support of this motion. The Mittagong Airfield's runway was constructed by the RAAF in 1944, as you know. The Mittagong Aero Club, a not-for-profit organisation, has financed and improved and maintained the airfield for the past 40 years. The Aero Club needs federal and state government funding to reseal the existing runway, and when the opportunity arises, lengthen the runway by 300 metres. Funding is available from the federal government's regional airport program, but it has been emphasised that local government support and advocacy has a major bearing on the success of the grant applications under the Regional Airports Program. As you would be well aware, the RFS recently operated from the field for 5 weeks. During that period, there were up to 13 helicopters operating, a mobile command and control vehicle, 3 aviation fuel tankers, numerous helicopter maintenance vehicles, and up to 50 personnel. The RFS had moved their operation from the Picton Oval to the Mittagong Airfield, and the base commanders and many of the pilots commented on the enhanced safety of their operations that the extra space and purpose-built airfield facility provided them. Our clubhouse was used as a briefing facility and ready room. The air conditioner, kitchen, permanent facilities, and even a TV made their 5-week stay at the field much more comfortable. Being based at the airfield meant that the supplies were able to be flown in. And indeed, on 2 occasions, one of the helicopter contractors flew in spare parts and mechanics from their base in Queensland. I also note comments made recently by the police local area commander, where he spoke of the airfield as an important asset in the community's emergency services infrastructure and of the role the airfield played in the recent bushfire crisis. This is the 3rd occasion in 10 years that the RFS have mounted a significant firefighting operation from the field. The field is also used by the RFS for training. On days of severe fire danger, fixed-wing aircraft have even been located to the field on ready standby. What is probably less well known is the use of the field by aircraft involved in medical and business activities. A local medical specialist uses his aircraft at least twice a week to attend his orange practice, and the existence of the Mittagong Airfield was a major factor in his decision to locate his main practice to Barrel 18 months ago. Aircraft involved in patient transfer often use the field, and the airfield also serves as an alternate landing field for the ambulance helicopter should the Barrel Hospital helipad be enveloped in cloud. The airfield's elevation is 400 foot lower than that of the hospital and is often clear of cloud when Barrel is not. A contractor involved in the redevelopment of the Barrel Hospital flies the company's 12-seater aircraft in from the headquarters in Albury, and an aircraft from the Hunter Valley thoroughbred racing industry is a regular user as they visit similar thoroughbred facilities in our area. I've spoken to pilots of aircraft visiting local businesses, including Tyrees and Berrima bus lines, and even those dropping off or collecting children from the local boarding schools. The Day on the Green promoter flew in earlier this year, and almost every single day there is at least one business-related use of the airfield. The New South Wales Parks and Wildlife and New South Wales Water helicopters are frequently in and out of the field, and just last Friday, New South Wales Parks were on the field in their fixed-wing Cessna. Powerline inspection helicopters spend 2 weeks of every year on the field, and similarly, smaller aircraft are often parked on the field for a few days visiting the area. The airfield is indeed an important part of the community's transport infrastructure, and for nearly 40 years, the Mittagong Aero Club has ensured it has been available to the community. We have done this without outside financial assistance, and our leasing and operating costs are significant. The gravel runway service was sealed by the Aero Club in 2007, and after considerable makeshift repairs over the last few years, the surface is now in need of resealing. More importantly, in the not too distant future, we expect to have the opportunity to extend the runway by 300 metres. In closing, the runway extension will enable the RFS fixed-wing firebombers to lift a full load of retardant from the airfield. Currently, the existing runway length restricts the aircraft to 2/3 of a load. Interestingly, increasing the runway's length would return it to the original RAAF constructed length. As I mentioned at the outset, federal government grants are available for this purpose. However, an important factor in being successful in our grant application will be local government support and advocacy. Together, we can not only ensure the Mittagong Airfield continues to exist and serve the Shire's ever-increasing aviation needs, but that its capabilities as a firefighting base are also enhanced.
Thank you.
I thank Councillor Gary Turlin for his continued support and advocacy and urge all councillors to support this motion. Thanks very much, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Okay,
Well
thank you.
done. Thank you. And as you know, being public forum, there is no questions to you. So thank you for very much for being part of the council meeting for the first live forum.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate the opportunity to let you know about our airfield.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, in relation to 18.4, in a notice of motion, Mr. Dennis deferred heritage items. Mr. Dennis McManus will address council on this item. Are you there, Mr. McManus? You there, Mr. McManus?
Yes, it's just been brought in. He's joining. He's joining.
Yeah. I've just been informed he is still coming through the lobby.
I believe he is just coming.
You there, Mr. McManus? Hello, Mr. McManus?
Yeah, trying to.
Mr. McManus? Mr. McManus is here. Welcome, Mr. McManus.
His audio is still connected.
Hang on, he's still connecting his audio. We'll have to get a quick look. Hello?
Oh, he's disappeared.
If Mr. McManus doesn't join, we will have to move on to the next visitor item. Councillor McLaughlin. You're on.
A copy of his statement I could read out, basically.
Is he still there?
He's there, but he's not responding to.
He's not responding. Then Councillor McLaughlin, then I'll give you the right to speak, but please try and use the time as efficiently as you can now. Yep. Councillor McLaughlin will read Mr. Dennis McManus's address.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dennis McManus is on my Heritage Committee. He has spent many years as a state heritage planner. For many years, he travelled this state as a state heritage officer. So I'll just read what he's put together. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors, for giving me the opportunity to speak briefly on this matter. Wingecarribee has had a good record in heritage management, but its current heritage listing is weaker than it should be and needs to be addressed. And this is the reason for the notice of motion 18.4 today. In considering the Welby Park Manor proposal subdivision in February this year, the assessment was unnecessary in the fact that Welby Manor was one of the many heritage items recommended but not listed 8 years ago. Welby Park Manor is one of more than 270 heritage items deferred by this council for not being properly listed in 2012. In 2008, heritage consultants were engaged by the council to review more than 700 heritage items identified by council and the community for potential heritage listing. More than half were recommended to be heritage listed. In 2012, council resolved to proceed with heritage listing of only 80 of these items and these properties, those whose owners supported the heritage listing, and those under the ownership or control of council. 57 in private ownership and 23 in ownership or control of council. A list of more than 270 items have been deferred. The Heritage Committee noted that the same Welby Park Manor situation has arisen in other cases, including recently at Rochester Park at Bundanoon and at Ware Tar at Exeter, where properties were recommended for listing in 2012 but deferred. All these properties have been subject of multiple subdivision proposals. It will come as no surprise to residents and councillors to know that many obvious heritage items are not currently listed, to name a few. And he goes on to name a few. I don't think I need to name them, Mr. Mayor. I'll just read on the last little bit here. Best practice management for dealing with heritage items is to list heritage items on the basis that they meet the established heritage criteria and to manage them with common sense and incentives. This is currently the case with the listed items in Wingecarribee Shire at the present. Proper processing of 270 non-listed items would provide for transparency for the current and future owners, the council and this community. Such transparency does not currently exist as a result of Council's 2012 deferral. In conclusion, I wish to confirm that all members of the Heritage Advisory Committee support this motion coming forward tonight in the agenda, item 18.4, recommending that a report on the proposed heritage items that were deferred in 2012 be brought back to Council for a resolution to proceed with these heritage items. He goes on to say, I thank you, Mr. Mayor and councils for listening to this. Dennis McManus. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, there's no questions or comment in relation to public forums.
I'm sorry he couldn't get to speak it himself, but that's the vagaries of this system. Okay,
thank you. We move on to 9.1, Development Application 19-1042, multi-dwelling house containing 7 units, 25 Oxley Drive, Bowral. And Mrs. Christine Ducker will address council against the development. So are you there, Mrs. Ducker?
Mr. Mayor, give me a second.
Good afternoon. We can see you. Can you hear us and see councillors?
I can hear you, but I certainly can't see you. Now, this has happened a couple of times with Zoom recently. Often fixed by going back out and coming in again, but
well, we can see you, so you're welcome to commence, and then you'll take, if you wish, councillors' questions afterwards. So away you go.
Okay, well, I'm staring at a white screen with funny arrows, so apologies if I look funny.
No, you don't.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to speak. You have all the papers, and this matter's been raised a couple of times. We received amended plans for this development that were prepared in March, I think, after Council's unanimous resolution at the February meeting about the development. However, all the neighbours, and they're listed in the letter, but they can't be on this meeting, obviously, we're not convinced that our early objections have been addressed by the developer, nor do we believe that Council's intention in the resolution that it made at the February meeting has also been addressed. So the fundamental objections remain. We note that there have been some amendments to the plans which are welcome, particularly in respect of drainage, some fencing issues. So there's been quite a few things added by Council since we began the objection process. We are grateful for that. But the real problem still is the steepness of this slope means that we still have the buildings in the middle of the site being from where we sit, and I'm looking at out of my room now at what will appear to be 4.5 stories in front of us. And somehow that's supposed to comply with the 2 stories above natural ground level. For most humans, though, natural ground level is where the ground is. So I note the technical requirement, but it doesn't actually serve the objective in this case. The flattening of the roof lines, we had our architect had anticipated that when he did that very first modelling that was submitted to the February meeting, and the council report keeps saying that his models were based on superseded plans. Well, they were based on the plans we had at the time, but as we pointed out at the February meeting, he did anticipate that flattening some of the roof lines would be a response that the developer might make, and he also modelled that at the time. In any case, he's since looked at the revised plans and he said that the skillion roofs create other problems because of the depth of the eaves. But in looking at all that and in talking to us about where our sunlight comes from, he was scratching his head and then went back and had another look and realised that the developer's modelling has a fairly fundamental flaw in it about where true north is. He says it's a common mistake that young architects make, but what it does means that the shadow diagrams submitted by the developer are not accurate. In fact, the shadow position would be worse if it were properly modelled than improved. So it's already pretty bad for us and we're not happy that it would be even worse in reality. So it's the townhouses in the centre of the development that cause the problem. One of the other features of the flat roofs is they're pretty ugly, and I know council's not in charge of ugly, but there's a comment in the report that that sort of roofline wouldn't be acceptable from street level, but somehow this will be looked on by about 15 or 20 surrounding neighbours and it has to be acceptable to us. Well, we don't see why we don't count as much as the people up at street level in the context of the overall development. So the major areas of dispute remain, and we note that they largely depend on the exercise of some judgment, particularly in respect of the appropriateness of the development for this site where it's to be built. And the neighbouring residents really can see no serious attempt by the developer to acknowledge our concerns or the council's unanimously approved motion at the February meeting. The report on page 7 states that the visual, I'm quoting here, the visual impact of the height of the development is not beyond that which would be expected within a medium density residential zone. We think that visual impact is a subjective assessment, but most people would have a similar understanding of what that is. And we disagree strongly with that conclusion. There's no other development in Barrel that we could find, and we've been around looking at all the medium density developments, most of which are extremely attractive, I have to say. But we can't find anything that has the height impact that this development has for us, which is of great concern. There are other contentious and inaccurate statements in the report that would help if they were appropriately addressed, but they're in the attachment. So all the neighbouring residents wish on their behalf and behalf of all of us to state that this development needs, in our view, to be totally reassessed. We're offended that the amended design is so out of character in Barrel that it wouldn't be appropriate if it were at street level, but somehow because we're the only ones that see it, it's okay. Our architect said he would be very happy to redesign the development and improve it substantially for both its own occupants and the surrounding residents. The big concern we still have is winter sun. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you've got your point across very well, but you are open for questions from councillors? Absolutely. Any questions from councillors to Mrs. Ducker? Please raise your hand. Councillor Turlin, you're on mute. You're on mute, Councillor Turlin.
No, not. What sort of changes does your architect anticipate that he could make in relation to the design?
I think he'd want to start again. He said it would not be. He said it's a difficult site. So acknowledge that. Whatever's there is going to annoy us. Let's get that out of the way. But it can annoy us less than it currently does, and certainly make a lesser impact on the overshadowing. And I think that would. He talked about having the townhouses across the development. I'm not quite certain what he means by that, but that they could all have their own courtyards and it would be visually much more appealing and a better place to live. But I think the main issue is that the central townhouses at the bottom of where the slope falls away significantly need to be a lot lower in height to avoid this 4.5 story, which is causing great overshadowing. I've been walking around looking at where it's going to land.
No, the question, I think the question has been answered.
Okay.
Councillor Trellan just asked what it would do, and we've got to just keep to the question. So, any other question from councillors? Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm just asking how many neighbours are there, and that you're definitely speaking on behalf of all the neighbours?
Yes, all the ones that are listed, which are 4 houses down the eastern side, the eastern boundary of the site of the development site, and the ones in the Berwick residences who are listed as well. And I've just forgotten the numbers. Sorry. It's on the bottom of that letter. So they're the ones I'm speaking for.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, no further questions. So, Councillor McLaughlin, did you want a question? No, I don't think you did. No. Okay, thank you, Mrs. Ducker.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will now have Ms. Alison Stevens will address council in support of the development. So we will turn you off, Mrs. Ducker. Ms. Alison Stevens, are you there?
We are just waiting for it.
Okay, so she's coming on. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Ms. Stevens. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Okay, you probably heard the previous speaker, so the floor is yours now for the prescribed time, so away you go.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Look, I'm Alison Stevens from Coble Stevens Architects. The plans in front of you today, they have been modified based on the deferral of the meeting of the 25th of March. The objections at that meeting were raised about the height of the development, and it was suggested through discussions between the councillors that a flat roof design would be preferred to the submitted pitch roofs, and specifically applied to units 3 through to 7. The street-facing units 1 to 2, would remain as previously submitted with the gable roofs. As such, we submitted amended plans in conjunction with talking to council's planner, with the roofs replaced with the minimum pitch scullion roof set at 5 degrees. This provides minimal fall, makes the roofs actually work, and avoids box gutters and other complications. We have provided 4 PDF files, and one of them's up on the screen already at the moment. They're elevation drawings, and they show the comparisons between the previous scheme with the pitch roofs and the current scheme with the amended roofs to skillion style. So this first sheet actually shows unit 7, which is the bottom unit. The red outline and shading show the previous pitch roof, and you can compare that to the skillion roofs below. On the second slide, this shows units 3, 4 and 5. So again, the comparison between the pitch roof that we had before and the skillion roofs now, with the red outline showing the previous roofs. The next slide, this shows the site elevation along the side with those details, the same details, but this showing it as a comprehensive elevation of the whole site. And the last slide shows the western side, again with the same outlines shown as a comparison. So look, we note in all instances that the bulk of the roofs has been reduced and the roof heights have been lowered as requested at the last meeting. Based on the applicant's willingness to modify the design as requested by the councillors and the outcome shown in these drawings, we ask council to endorse the recommendation of their planning department and approve this application. And look, just in response to some of those things raised just before, look, the site is particularly challenging. When my client bought the site, it had already had an assessment by another architect, and they had thrown some plans on and sort of showed how the site could be modelled. But look, it all boils down to the slope of the site, getting access to a vehicle, and that kind of sets the benching for all of the dwellings. So we have built it into the ground as much as we can to still make it a site that can be accessed. So I just wanted to mention that. And hopefully you will see that this change has made the roofs lower and has reduced the bulk significantly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got two lots. Councillor, I think Turland had his hand up first, then Councillor McLaughlin, then Councillor Nelson. Councillor Turland.
Yeah, through the chair to Mr. Wilton, if you can.
Can we just deal with Ms. Stevens first, and then you can direct those questions to Mr. Wilton? We normally don't.
Okay. Well, the question I'm going to ask Ms. Stevens is in relation to the facing of north, exactly on the plans. Are you confident that the plans indicate true north?
Look, I actually, because I'm sitting here in front of my computer, was able to pull up my plans, and I've found the survey that I've been working off. So I can only go on the information that I had on my survey, but I've just cross-checked and everything appears to be correct. So that's all I can say at this moment, looking at my survey plans. I've worked off the north point that I was given by the surveyor.
I'm a registered surveyor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin. And then Councillor Nelson. Take your mute off, Graham.
Not me.
Yes, you're right now.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Stevens. When you mentioned that you built into the ground as far as you possibly can you give us some idea how far that is, and what were the limitations there, please?
Sure. Look, I actually spent a significant amount of time playing around with this site before we really got into it. And what it boils down to is that we have a set point up at the curb at the very start of the site at the street. We have a requirement for an accessible path of travel, which means a disabled gradient to get into the first two houses, which are our accessible houses. So that basically there's only so far you can go before you get to the houses at a certain gradient. Then we have flat areas where we need to be able to turn into garages. And then we have transitions in between each of those. So essentially what I did was I planned from the street to the first house. I then allowed parking and turning space. And then I have the maximum gradients you can really have down to the next house. And that basically set the benchmark for the next house, a flat area for their garages, and then dash down again as steeply as you can. So in the end, this project really boiled down to getting the driveway gradients as low as I could so that we could be as low down in the ground as possible. And it's quite a lot of time spent on that and with traffic engineers to make that all work.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson, and then any other Councillor Scandal. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My question was about True North as well, but since that's been answered, the other objections that were raised were about drainage and fencing. I'm not sure if you could elaborate on what those concerns might be.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Ms. Stevens.
Yes, look, I'm not exactly sure. We've got existing fencing along the western side. Those units already have fencing there, which we intend to essentially leave unless it needs repair. Along the eastern side, there are some of the properties that don't yet have back fences. Those properties would have fences put in as per the normal boundary fence guidelines. As to drainage, we have got hydraulic engineers involved. They have done all the modelling in terms of collection on site, detention, release into council systems. So that has all been covered by the specialist engineers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Scandal. Councillor Scandal. You letting me in?
You can unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself.
He's trying to unmute at the same time as me, Mr. Mayor, which...
Right, thank you. I thought that was being done from Ms. Lidgard, Mr. Crawford. Question for you, if I may, Ms. Stevens. over your time planning this project, what was the maximum number of units that you have submitted in comparison to now?
Well, previously we had 8 units on the site. We took away 1 unit to actually improve the site because the units were, one of the units was fairly cramped. And so it was a decision made to remove that so that we had more space to work with. And that did allow us to actually drop some units and provide more outdoor space, move walls of units further away from side boundaries. So we did go from 8 to 7 fairly early on.
And accordingly, a further reduction could allow some flexibility, maybe some more accessibility in view of the set points that you've mentioned. Is that correct?
Look, in a way, because the site is so steep, it's a matter of there only being certain locations we can actually put buildings and have vehicles access and turn and do all those kinds of things, and without progressing further down the site into the area where all the trees are. So we have clustered them basically to avoid those trees down the bottom of the site. So look, there would be potential for making some change. It might not necessarily make a huge difference because some buildings are going to need to be where they are to allow enough transition between garages and slopes and all that kind of thing. It's quite complex.
Thank you.
All right. Now, Councillor Mark Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief question for Ms. Stevens. You mentioned the maximum gradient driveways. In your opinion, how difficult would they be to navigate for people who are not as young as perhaps some of us would like to be, especially given, I guess, weather conditions, what have you? How difficult the maximum gradient and the close turning circles you're referring to?
Well, essentially, the site, it all complies with standard gradients. We've had the traffic engineers review all of that. I guess it's no different to living in any of the properties next door in that some of them have quite a steep driveway or roadway to get to their houses. They wouldn't necessarily, in bad weather, choose to walk up their driveway, which probably has a similar gradient. The advantage, I suppose, is that this driveway does actually have quite a lot of transitions in it, and that there are level areas as you progress down the site. So unlike the access road to the properties on the east, which is a single driveway that has one slope on it, this driveway actually has several areas where it flattens out and then goes back up again. So
better than or comparable than the adjacent properties, you'd say?
I believe so, yes. I think
okay,
in both instances, yeah, they all have the same challenges.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. No further questions. Then okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will put you in the lobby now, so you'll disappear from the screens. But thank you for your participation. Thank you. Councillor Nelson, can I ask you to move closer to the centre of your screen? You're one way. A bit more, a little bit more. That's it. That's much better. Yeah, we can see you now. Mr. Wilton will introduce the item. Are you there, Mr. Wilton?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to consider DA 191042, which seeks development consent for the purpose of the multi-dwelling housing development, 25 Oxley Drive, Bowral. Councillors will recall that this matter was deferred at the meeting of the 26th of February 2020, pending a redesign of the built form to reduce the overshadowing impacts on the adjoining properties. Councillors also be aware that the proposal included the construction of 3 4-bedroom units and 4 3-bedroom units within 3 2-storey buildings, stepping down the site. Each proposed building in its original proposal identified a roof pitch of 25 degrees, and the application was also supported by shadow diagrams which identified adjoining properties were able to maintain 3 hours of solar access at the winter solstice. Following the resolution of Council in February, the applicant was requested by Council staff to further redesign the proposal and incorporate a reduction in the overall building height. Accordingly, the applicant has submitted amended plans which have been altered the roof line of the proposed units 3 through to 7 from a 25-degree gable and a hip end roof pitch to a 5-degree skid-in roof. Units 1 and 2 fronting Oxley Drive have been retained at the 25-degree roof pitch, which will maintain existing rhythm and streetscape character. The amended plans demonstrate a further reduction in the overall building height to 6.5 metres above natural ground level, which is further compliance with the current DCP controls of a maximum 9 metres at the building height. The reductions also further increase solar access into adjoining properties and will further increase compliance with respect to overshadowing controls. And on this basis, the amended design has been assessed and is fully compliant with Council's LEP and DCP controls with respect to the relation to the lot width is the only departure, and it's been recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilton. I've seen Councillor McLaughlin and Councillor Turlin with hands up. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the GM to Mr. Wilton, with regard to this development, and I have gone and had a look at this, it is a very narrow and steep block, and as you suggested, is not quite the correct width. Is there anything that you could suggest with regard to the design of this that would make for a better amenity for the neighbours with regard to the heights, the overshadowing, the issues that have been raised in the objections?
Mr. Wilton.
Through the chair, obviously this development site is extremely constrained in terms of not only topography, but also that it has existing natural vegetation on the site, which has been sought to be retained. It also does have existing issues relating to flooding at the bottom of the site. So in terms of the actual building footprint, it is fairly limited. In terms of use of the site, in terms of the DCP controls, it is able to be utilised at a two-storey basis. Look, if it was to be reduced down to 1 storey, yes. Look, that could assist in some overshadowing, but at the end of the day, it does still comply with the DCP controls relating to 3 hours of natural sunlight being able to be achieved at the adjoining properties.
And the properties on the other side, Mr. Wilton, are they 2-storey or single-storey?
I think there's some in there that are single-storey, and I think there's some that's 2-storey as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turlin. Who's muted too?
If that could be moved down a little bit further, from what I can see on the plan, the garage is on the top level. There's no garages beyond that point because the boundary doesn't allow any driveway down. But if you could move unit 7 down, you could then split unit 4 and 3. So there's not just one big block on unit, well, 3 units there. So it's actually 3, 4 and 5. Try and split those to make it look like it's not just one big block of a townhouse. Is that, how far can you move down to the south with the last unit 7?
Mr. Wilton.
Through the chair, obviously the further you move down the slope, the greater the gradient is. So that's going to obviously offer some challenges in relation to that. And also there is some existing vegetation down there that we're trying to retain, which would obviously be impacted as a result of further development down the bottom of the site.
Yeah, I get that. But what I'm saying is if you could move it down and give a break between units 3, 4 and 5, I think it is, because it's very hard to read off this drawing, it would give a little bit of a break to the properties on the east, which are the issues at the moment. That doesn't show us off that plan.
Mr. Wilton.
Obviously through the chair, it would break up the bulk and scale in terms of the visual amenity, but I don't think it would offer much relief in terms of the overall height of the development or in relation to overshadowing.
Right, thank you. Councillor Marport.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for Mr. Wilton. If you're allowed to comment on this, of course, In your belief, to make any substantial improvement regarding the neighbours' concerns, it would have to move from a 2-storey to a 1-storey development. Is that your feeling?
Through the chair, obviously, look, as I said before, it would reduce the impact further in terms of reducing the overall bulk and scale of development and also reducing the height of it. But as I said before, it is compliant in terms of the 3-hour solar access. And the bulk and scale in terms of the actual site is actually below council standards.
All right, thank you. Councillor Whipper, and then Councillor Scander.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Wilton, I noticed that the recommendation is for deferred commencement. Can you explain the rationale for that, please?
Through the chair, the deferred commencement arrangement is because there is an easement at the rear of the site. There's an administrative process that needs to go through in order to register that easement. I believe that there is agreement at this point in time to enable access of stormwater from this site across that property, but that would need to be sorted out prior to an actual operational consent being issued. It's an administrative process.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you, Councillor Scander. Who's muting?
Unmuted. Thank you. Mr. Wilton, could you just comment on the issue of the gradient in the driveway to the lower units? We heard the architect speak about the fact that it complies and that the top units, 2 units, are disabled friendly. I'm worried about the safety issues of accessing the lower units for that part of the community that is over, well, it's 36% of our community are over 60. Could you comment on how marginal that is, and do you think there are issues in that space?
Mr. Wilton, through you.
Through the chair, obviously the front 2 units being accessible units have a gradient of 1 in 14 for the driveway. That's for obviously for disabled access or people with have got disabled issues. Moving further down the slope, it can actually access a steeper topography in terms of driveway gradients, in terms of accessing going down that site. Obviously, that's being checked by our development engineers and is compliant with council standards.
Thank you. All right, well, that's sort of finished off the questions, I think. We are now looking for a recommendation.
Yes, I'll move one.
Councillor Scander.
I'm going to move that the matter be refused because of a number of reasons.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor McLaughlin, you're seconding for refusal. Yeah, Councillor McLaughlin seconded. Refusal. Councillor Scander, you can speak to it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an exercise in jamming as many units onto a site as possible, and it's what's going wrong with our area. We've seen it particularly in this part of Barrel. I have no problem with redeveloping the site, but when it's maximising it and it's at the expense of both neighbours' amenity and the amenity of the future owners of these buildings, I have great concerns. So I will prepare a list of reasons for my recommendation for refusal whilst others speak, but I think, quite frankly, we should refuse it. But I will add into that that the applicant be invited to submit a revised design with lesser number of dwellings.
Okay, so that's been seconded, and do we have anybody against the refusal notice? Councillor Andrews, and then Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes.
Hang on, Councillor Andrews. We have to unmute you.
There, how's that?
No, I don't be a fortunate. He needs to give his reasons before the debate starts.
Yes, right. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to move an amendment, if I may, please, the recommendation as an amendment.
Okay, you can't move the recommendation. You can only move that as a a notice arising, that you give notice that subject to the debate, you'll give the recommendation as a motion arising.
No problem.
Okay. Now, councillors, councillor, just before I get to you, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Scandrett,
yes.
Do you have the reasons for refusal there as part of your motion?
I'm just typing them up now, Mr. Mayor, and I'll send them to Miss Richardson.
Well, look, can I say this to councillors, and we say it at every meeting? You should be aware of your feelings and listen to the debate, so I can't criticise that. But can you write down your notice of motion that you feel that you may move? This is the first time we've done this, and then they've got to be put to Ms. Richardson so she can put them up on the screen before they're voted on. We can't vote on something that hasn't been submitted. So we are an hour into the meeting. We haven't got through the first item, and we have to be well organised as a council. Councillor McLaughlin, you may speak.
Which council?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think the suggestions that were put forward by Councillor Turlin have some merit. It is a very difficult block.
Well, Councillor Turlin, can you just quietly turn your pages? You're coming through fairly loudly. Okay. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah. Look, I think given the motion that's been put by Councillor Scandrett that the developer be invited back with amended plans, I think the suggestion by Councillor Turlin could be taken on board. We did hear the steepness of this site with regard to the gradient of the road is what has allowed for some of the problems on this. And I think the suggestion, as I said, that Councillor Turlin makes about splitting up those units so they don't appear as one great big villa has some merit. If they were decided to come back with maybe one less unit and they could move them down the hill further, I think they might find that it would be more accommodating for the neighbours and for this council to support it. But I'm happy to refuse it at the moment. I do appreciate, can I say, that the architect has gone away and tried to make some allowances for the neighbours with regard to overshadowing, but it is still a very bulky building at a ground level. The way it looks, it does appear to be 4 levels out of the ground for the neighbours, which is pretty unsightly in my book. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Andrews, did you have the right to speak to your motion arising, if you wish?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, very simply, I mean, I shouldn't, and I probably won't imply that here we go again. This development, as Mr. Wilton indicated, completely complies with BCP LEP. I appreciate that, and really appreciate that the applicant's gone away and came back with a redesigned roof area in villas 3 to 7. It's a significant change. It's certainly a significant change to the roof area, and it's really offset both the visual and foreshadowing problems that have been mentioned by the objectors. So once again, I indicate that this is, we're off to court again. I would hope not, but I suggest if we refuse this, that's what will happen, and the DA, as it's been presented now, complies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Scandrett, are you any further advanced on your reasons for refusal?
Take him off mute.
About to press send, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Look, we're having a bit of teething problems here. Do you want council staff to take you off mute, or do you want to take yourselves off mute? I think it has to be one or the other. Otherwise, we're going to have this delay and sense of frustration that councillors are on mute, off mute, you haven't unmuted me, whatever. So
happy to do it myself, thank you.
Okay. So, Councillor, can we write this down? Councillor Mark will unmute himself. Who else? Councillor Nelson? Councillor
Yes, I'll unmute myself as well, Mr Mayor, but I'd also like to speak as well.
Yeah, right.
I'd like to defer the matter. Councillor
McLaughlin, everybody except Councillor Andrews will be unmuting themselves. So, Councillor Andrews and then Councillor Nelson. Councillor Andrews. No, you finished speaking, haven't you? Yep, Councillor Andrews. Sorry, Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll be voting against Councillor Scandrett's motion, but what I'd like to do is get the applicant and the objectors together again. Well, they weren't there before, but I'd like the objectors to be heard by the applicant. So I'd be wanting to defer the matter subject to the neighbours' objections being addressed. So I'll wait until the vote, but that's where I'll be heading.
Okay, well, there is a motion arising subject to it, and then you will then be able to put, if that is successful, a motion for deferment, because the motion will be that it be approved.
But the deferral motion will be not a direct negative, so Councillor Newton can put that through now.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want to. He said he wanted to see how the vote went.
Well, I'm happy to put that through as an amendment if that's acceptable.
It is acceptable.
It's acceptable, yes.
Well, I would put the amendment that the matter be deferred subject to the neighbours' objections being addressed.
Okay, do you, seconded by Councillor Markward? So you have
Mr. Mayor, I've sent those, Mr. Mayor, I've sent those reasons in.
Okay, so the reasons are being put up on the screen. Councillor Markward, do you wish to speak?
Not at this stage, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Okay, so is there Councillor Turlin?
Yeah, I think the motion has been put forward by Nelson and Markwood. Needs to be a bit wider. You can't say subject to the neighbours' objections being addressed, because they might not all be addressed. There's got to be an association between both parties, but you know, if one of the issues that can't be addressed, that motion that's just been put forward or the amendment will be useless. So it needs to be worded so that they can at least work together to try and come up with a solution that both parties will live with, one financially for the developer and one emotionally for the residents.
Right.
That's how
Yes, Councillor.
It needs to be a little bit better than what it is.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor Turlin is correct, and subject to Councillor Nelson, it should have words to the concern along the lines that there must be some discussion of the concerns, both parties, and the further report comes back to council for determination.
Okay, so if you go through the areas of concern by the neighbours, then they should be, as suggested by Councillor Turlin, if you nominate the points that you believe are the main objections, noting that the objector wanted the whole thing to be revamped. Now, that, I think, is not on the going to happen. But what areas of concern, Councillor Nelson, do you want them to discuss?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, there was, I agree with Councillor Turlin about the amendment, and it does need to be clearer. And just a point of clarification, in the past, we have had both the objector and the applicant meet with staff to sort out the issues. So I take the point of Councillor Turlin that obviously if they can't sort out all the issues, it falls over. I think there just needs to be an opportunity for the objectors and the applicant to come together to get this application to be advanced to some degree, with drainage, fencing, True North all being considered. Obviously, the development can't be redone to the satisfaction of the objectors, but there can be a mutual meeting and mutual understanding of where these units are going.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Turlin, are you speaking or clarification? You've already spoken. You'll have to take yourself off mute. Take yourself off mute, Councillor Turlin.
I was only correcting in relation to the motion that Nelson and Mark would put forward, just to make sure it was a bit more precise. May I speak now?
Yes.
Okay. What I was trying to get at, if we move the last unit 7 down towards the house that's on the eastern side to the same level of the block of lands that's been subdivided by other parties on the east, which is 29C, the last house that's been constructed, what you'll see is you'll be able to split pretty clearly the other units further up, which back onto the neighbours' houses, which is 29A and 29. Now, by splitting them up, what we have is a 3-storey building, I think on unit 4, looking at what I've made note here, unit 4, because you actually have a garage, a first floor, and then you have a ground floor, then you have a first floor. But when you look at the yellow line that's on the plan on page 61 of the drawings, you can see that the excavation from the yellow line to where the garage level is somewhere in the vicinity of about 2.5 to 3 metres of excavation. So that makes it a 3-storey building. But what will happen, there'll be a retaining wall along the boundary, so it won't be seen from 29A and 29. But by splitting that long block of units up, by moving the unit down the hill a little bit, that's unit 7, what it achieves is actually, it makes it 4 buildings, not just 3 big buildings. But what also the question is that the landscaping issue down towards the river, Mittagong Rivulet, if you look at the plan, it could also be, landscaping can be brought in to address that concern. At the moment, you need 50% landscaping to require with the DCP requirements. But by splitting these buildings in half, more landscaping can be in the middle and not just down the front. Now, I know you're trying to keep the original eucalypt trees that are down the bottom there, but in years gone by, you've subdivided 5 lots of land and taken all the trees out maybe 15 years ago. Just because these have a few eucalypts down the bottom, but if we take a few others out, move 7 down, split 4 and 5 in half, you can put a landscaping bay in the middle, which actually helps the neighbour, which is 29A and 29. And, you know, so it just actually breaks up the whole development. It's going to get to a point where it's not viable. So what you're going to have is either he's going to go to court to fight this issue, because it's not viable if we take units off him. We're never going to be able to make them single story. That's never going to happen. But I think the opportunity will allow moving of the last unit down and then increase the landscaping on the southern end towards the creek in the middle, and breaking those units, you'll achieve what everybody's after.
Right, thank you. Now, can we have someone? We're starting to get this a bit convoluted. I think we'll go for right of reply to Councillor Scandrett. We've got the reasons from Councillor Scandrett. Your right of reply, Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I do that, could we just scroll down to Councillor Nelson's motion? Yes. Councillor Nelson, would you like to support my motion and add part of yours into that? it's consistent with my being invited to come back there.
I would suggest that
No.
All right.
Councillor.
Okay, I'll speak. Thank you. Look, my concerns, and rather than, with the greatest respect to Councillor Turlin, you know, this is design on the run. We've had this one in before. We had similar issues with it. They related to solar access. They related to access, physical and car, to density and so on. And we've heard today that they've addressed some of these things with the introduction of some flat roof and so on. But we still haven't got away from the fact that the whole thing is driven by the need to get a maximum yield. And I think the quality of the housing that we are being asked to approve here, councillors, is not of the best quality. It's not what we set out to do in this area. If you're going to jam it in cheek by jowl, by all means do that. We might as well just put boxy units up. So that's why I say, let's refuse it. Those are the reasons that I've put there. Councillor McLaughlin, I invite you to add any to that you might like. And I say that we invite them to come back with a lesser number of units, which is what others are saying, to try and improve on those issues. Councillor McLaughlin, any other points?
Councillor Turlin, thank you. Councillor Scandred, I mean, thank you. Then that is the right of reply. All in favour that it be refused.
No. We've got to do the
amendment. We've got the amendment of Councillor Nelson. Councillor Nelson, all in favour of Councillor Nelson's amendment, please put your hand to the screen.
And call them out because it's
Councillor Turlin, Councillor Markwart, Councillor McLaughlin and Councillor Nelson. Councillor Nelson, can you, your hand, when you vote, you're not on the screen. Your hand's not on the screen.
Use the other hand.
Use your, that's it. Thank you.
Put your hand in front of the camera,
okay. So those for the amendment, I'll do it again because this is the first time we've run it around. In favour of the amendment, moved by Councillor Nelson. All in favour of Councillor Nelson's. How are you voting, Councillor Nelson? Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Turlin, and Councillor Markwart. And there is a 4 split there. I will be voting for deferral. Okay, so the amendment becomes the motion. I now put the motion. All in favour say aye or raise your hands. All in favour. That's Councillors Turlin, Whipper, no. Councillors Turlin, Markwart, McLaughlin, Nelson and Gare. I declare the motion carried. Now, Councillor Andrews gave notice of a motion arising. It's been approved.
But the amendment has been passed.
Yes, but subject to it being refused. Yeah. So the motion is deferred to come back with amended plans to meet with the objectives. Okay, so we move on to 9.2 visitor item in relation to the Bandoola estate. And we have 9.2, Mr. Kerry Nash will address council in support of the development. Are you there, Mr. Nash?
Yes,
We're still looking for Mr. Nash. You there, Mr. Nash? Who's that down the bottom?
Yeah, it's him there, but his audio is not connected.
So we've got you on screen. Can you raise your hand if you can hear? Raise your hand if you can hear, Mr. Nash.
I can't. Do we know why, Tom?
I think you're on mute. You are muted. Have you muted? You can't hear.
You could try sending Mr. Nash a chat message.
That's being done now, Councillor.
That's yes.
You're 2 steps ahead of me there. Thank you.
We're going to have to do a bit of get them organised earlier. We should be ringing them. Mr. Nash, can you hear? Has he got a telephone number?
Yeah.
He hasn't connected his audio.
Can, well, he can't see.
Ian's going to call him now.
Maybe we write a letter and put it on the screen.
Oh, hang on, no, he's connecting his audio now.
Can you hear me?
Yep. You're there.
You there? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Right.
You've been lost in the wilderness.
Yes.
Welcome, Mr. Nash. You have, you know the time frames and whatever. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. This is for stage 2 of the Benduli estate development that Council approved in 2019 for the concept development application. And it doesn't include all of what was identified as stage 2 in that approval, but it does include the accommodation lodge, providing 41 rooms, 39 rooms and 2 family suites, a restaurant for 80 persons, patrons to service that accommodation lodge, and meeting rooms with a capacity of 40 persons. And the third element is the secular meeting place. This is a new element that is described in some detail in the report and in the report in section 9.3 of the agenda. That is a new element that has been included to address the demand that Benduli Estate have found for secular environments for celebratory events such as memorial ceremonies and the like. So that's a lightweight single-storey building that is located proximate to the remnant vegetation. And the fourth element in this DA is the housekeeping facility associated with the accommodation lodge. All up, the proposal adopts the conditions that were imposed in the concept development application in respect of the 30-metre setback from the common boundary with 392 Hume Highway. It incorporates the 2-metre high mounding along that boundary, and that will ensure that given the physical separation distances to the residents at 3092, and with that acoustic earth mounding, that there will be no adverse impacts on that property. Another condition that was in the concept development application was the retention of the native vegetation. To achieve certainty on that, each tree was located by a registered surveyor on the drawings, and that's reflected on the drawings, and that has necessitated in discussions with council where we actually had to move the proposed secular meeting place to ensure that there was no impacts on those remnant trees. All up, there will be 30 additional staff involved in those uses in this part of two, and there will be 96 car parking spaces associated with the restaurant and secular meeting place. In addition to those buildings, there will be the internal roadworks, the parking areas, stormwater management and landscaping, all forming part of this application. I think that, and there will also be a substation involved adjacent to the housekeeping building. So I think the councillors, because it forms a detail of the concept DA that was adopted by you last year, you're, I think, reasonably familiar with the purpose of this tourist and accommodation master plan for Bendooley Estate.
Thank you, Mr. Nash. Now, Councillor Scandrett wishes to ask a question. Any other councillors, so I can call you in? Councillor Whipper will be next. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, Mr. Nash. I'd like to just ask, is the Burklow family, again, intending to use local trades and suppliers wherever possible, and what is the time frame, if any, at this time to commence some of these this development, please?
Through you, Mr. Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The impact of COVID-19 has been sudden for all businesses, and I'm sure there are local trades and services within your municipality that have suffered from the reduction in services that are normally provided through Bendooley Estate. The purpose of this DA is to focus importantly on the provision of additional accommodation on the site. So it will be, to a certain extent, it'll be in the hands of the gods in terms of the recovery of the economy, but I can assure the councillors that Bendooley Estate will continue to utilise the local produce, the local services and facilities, other local residential providers, tourist accommodation providers, and also in terms of employment, both full-time and part-time to local persons.
Thank you, Mr. Nash. Mr. Mayor, I'll be moving the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor, who did I call? Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Nash, just in relation to the accommodation lodge, could you just clarify that that is for the benefit of guests and that there is no workers' accommodation included in that that structure?
That's correct. It is tourist accommodation only, and staff accommodation, you may remember, forms part of stage 4 of the concept development consent.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Thank you.
Okay, no other question. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nash. Yeah, just following on from Councillor Whipper with regard to stage 4, and obviously we'll wait for that time, but I have a few concerns with regard to, I know you're a very good local employer, and I can't see why you would need accommodation for on-site for your employees that now live in the area. And the question is, well, look, the question is, why is it necessary in stage 4 to have accommodation on-site for employees?
Thank you, Mr. Nash.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The staff accommodation is for 8 persons, and that is scheduled for when the total development is fully operational, and it is designed to it recognises that there will be a necessity in its full operation for staff to be permanently on site. It's not a large number, and it is shared accommodation, and I think from a practical point of view, it's fundamental to the operations of the Bendooley estate when it is fully operational.
It's not operating 24 hours a day.
Thank you. We can't go on. We're running behind.
Right, okay.
Mr. No more questions to Mr. Nash. Thank you very much, sir. If you stay there, we will put you in the lobby, so to speak, and because you're on the next item as well. So thank you. Now, Councillor Scandrett has foreshadowed that he is moving the recommendation. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Turley. Oh, Councillor, was it? Councillor Whipper raised his hand first. Can I ask councillors to address everybody by the term of Mr, Councillor or Madam, please, depending who you're speaking to. Councillor Scandrett, you have the right to speak, and then Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I wanted a question, Mr. Mayor.
Well, Mr. Nash is gone.
No, for the staff.
No, I was going to say you're right, Councillor Nelson. We'll have an introduction by Mr. Wilton for that question.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilton?
Through the Chair, the purpose of this report is to consider DA 200102, which seeks development consent for the purpose of the construction of a number of tourist and visitor accommodation buildings at the Bendooley Estate, 3020 Old Hume Highway, Berrima. The site is located to the north of the Berrima Township, and it was zoned SP3 tourist, and the proposed development as identified is permissible with consent of the council. The current proposal seeks development consent for the construction of use of a new restaurant to accommodate 80 people, and a bar and lounge area, and 2 meeting rooms for 40 patrons. A new secular building for the special events with a capacity of up to 120 persons. Accommodation lodge with a capacity to accommodate 39 standard rooms and 2 family suites, and also housekeeping facilities for utility use as well. The application also seeks consent for the construction of local infrastructure, including internal road networks, car parking, substations, landscaping, stormwater management works, and also wastewater treatment works that were included in the approved Bendooley Estate Master Plan in 2019. The proposed hours of operation associated with the current development application for the restaurant, bar and lounge, including the meeting rooms and secular building, is 9 AM to 11:30, with guests out by 11:45, 7 days a week. On New Year's Eve, that will operate until 1 AM. An acoustics report has also been submitted with the application in support of these proposed hours of operation as well. All buildings will be set back a minimum of 30 metres from the southern boundary of the property, with the exception of parking, which will be within the 30-metre setback. An earth mound has proposed to be constructed along with landscaping treatments in order to appropriately provide acoustic treatment and an arborist report has also been provided to assist with the management of the earth mound to protect the existing vegetation. The application was notified between the 14th of August and also the 20th of September in 2019, and one submission was received during the notification period. The issues identified within the submission period included hours of operation, landscaping treatments, protection of existing landscape screening, and those issues have been appropriately addressed within the application and also by way of draft conditions of consent. Accordingly, council staff assess the proposal in accordance with section 4.15 and have recommended approval on this occasion.
Thank you, Mr.
Just a question. I think
excuse me, Councillor Turley.
No, I think he's on the wrong one. It's not a 455. We're actually on the other one, the first one. We're on the DA, the tourism, not the 455.
No, Councillor, Mr. Wilton.
He's just gone through all the...
I'm on the DA.
He's on the DA. Thank you. Question, Mr. Nelson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you. I had discussions with Nick prior to the meeting.
Mr. Wilton, you had...
Mr. Wilton, yes, Mr. Wilton. Does my considerations come into play here concerning the hours of operation?
Yes, yes, Mr. Wilton, you may answer, please.
Through the chair, yes, those considerations would be required to be placed in both conditions of consent in relation to both the modification and also the DA that's being considered at this point in time. So the modification, the modification is to the concept approval, and this DA is in relation to the construction and operation of those facilities.
Right. So if that it applies here, then I'll be moving an amendment with that. It'll be approval with that extra condition on the hours of operation.
Right. Okay. Well, let's get the questions out of the way, but that's noted. Councillor McLaughlin, then other questions? Anybody else after McLaughlin got a question? Councillor McLaughlin? Councillor Whipper? Councillor McLaughlin? You've got to unmute yourself, Councillor McLaughlin.
Oh.
That's it. You're right.
Okay, I'm all right now? Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Wilton has mentioned that there's a 30-metre setback to the neighbour, and I think that's the neighbour that objected. But the car park, is it within that area? I know there's a bunding there, but a lot of movements of cars late at night can be very disturbing. Are we satisfied with the car parking there? And how close is that in that 30-metre zone to the neighbour?
Thank you. Mr. Wilton.
Through the chair, yes, the 30-metre setback relates to buildings on the property, and all buildings are outside of that 30-metre zone. There is a small portion of the road which traverses into that 30-metre zone, and also some car parking as well. The earth mound will ensure that there's no light spill into the adjoining property, and we're also satisfied that mound will provide for acoustic treatment to reduce noise emanating to the adjoining property.
Thanks, Mr. Wilton. I think I'll be supporting Councillor Nelson with this.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Whipper, then another question. Councillor Turley. Councillor Whipper. Did you have a question, Councillor?
No question. No.
Councillor Turley, then any other questions? Okay, Councillor.
Yeah. Why are we not dealing with the 4.5 first? The variation, modification.
Because we're dealing with the DA.
Yeah, but the modification to the master plan is what the story is. That's what happens. And then you put the DA over the top of the master plan.
I know you disagree, but we are dealing with the DA.
It is back to front. The master plan sets what you can do in a DA. You're approving a DA before the master plan.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Councillor Scandron. Unmute yourself.
Could Mr. Wilton advise if the neighbour is the one to the north, please, the objecting neighbour?
Is the neighbour Mr. Wilton?
Through the chair, I think it's the neighbour to the south, I believe, is the objective to this development.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
All right. No more further questions. It's been moved by Councillor Scandrett and seconded by Councillor Whipper. An amendment. And then there is an amendment by, or do you want it included in the motion, or will it be accepted? And then
No. I'll move the amendment. I think Councillor McLaughlin is going to second it. So I've sent it through to the secretary, minute taker. So it's the approval plus that the general manager be delegated the authority to impose a condition of development consent restricting the hours of operation of the secular building and the restaurant to 10:30 p.m. Monday to Sunday, 7 days a week, commencing 12 months after the issue of an occupation certificate for these developments, and should no complaints be received relating to amenity during the 12-month period following commencement of the use of the buildings, council would be then considered via way of a section 455 application to extend the hours to 11 p.m. and out by 11:30 p.m. in perpetuity. And I can speak to it if you like.
No, not just yet. And seconded by Councillor McLaughlin. Happy to. The mover has the right to speak initially. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, here we are, councillors, at a time when we desperately need more employment as we come out of this crisis. Here's something that has been waiting now for quite a while because of the delays in hearing it, has been extensively consulted, and we're going to throttle it with a motion to restrict its hours for 12 months. We're wanting concerts back in the Highlands at Centennial, and people coming to those need to stay. When they go home from the concert, it'll be after 10:30, Councillor Nelson and McLaughlin, and they will want to have a quiet little drink.
Well, point of order, Mr. Mayor.
On their veranda.
Excuse me, Councillor Scandrett, please do not make adverse comments to another councillor. It is your opinion without being derogatory to your fellow councillors. I'm
certainly not being derogatory. It is my opinion, councillor.
I have a point of order, Mr. Mayor.
What is your point of order, councillor?
Councillor Scandrett has got the horse before the cart because my amendment allows the timing.
No point of order. You haven't had the right to speak, so you can address that in your reply, in your address. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see the amendment on the screen with a 12-month make it good, but that's going to be one neighbour's only complaint. Look, we need to get going with this. This is one of our premier destinations in the Highlands. Like Centennial, as I mentioned with the concerts, we need to be open for business, and we need to be open for business as soon as economic conditions allow. So that covenant that is being suggested by other councillors, that could hold this up for another 12 months after when the economy might be restoring. We need to get on with this now. Yes, we do. Don't shake your head. I hear what Mr. Nash has to say about the economic conditions at the moment, but the last thing I want to do is to cause any restriction on those, Mr. Mayor. So I'm encouraging all councillors to show that we are ready to go in this shire, 2 hours from Sydney. When people start coming out of Sydney, they're going to go local, and that might be the case for a couple of years. So let's get this going. Let's get this started. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson, you have...
Yep, I'll speak against that and clarify those points. Firstly, Mr. Mayor, my amendment is saying that the approval go ahead with the times there to test the water for 12 months to see that 11:30 is okay with the neighbours. Because if you look on page 80, Mr. Mayor, you'll see that to the north it's 500 metres, to the east it's 300 metres, Southwest, there's a residence, a horse adjustment property, 150 metres away. Further to the southwest, 2 single-storey residents, 200 metres away. And to the west, 150 metres away. Now, Mr Mayor, we know how noise travels at night, and I'm offering an opportunity that council is not imposing terrible noise issues for these neighbours, so that we can test this out for 12 months and see how it goes. But otherwise, I'm giving approval for the restaurant to be closing at 10:30. So that's where I'm heading with this, because we've been there with all the noise issues before with these people, other applications, and we know what sort of noise comes from weddings and places with bands. So that's where I'm heading, Mr Mayor.
May I make a suggestion, and that is that it be approved subject to with the normal hours, subject to a review within 6 months of the commencement of the business to determine whether there are issues. I think, anyway, just thought.
Mr Mayor, I did consider 6 months. I was just wondering the issue of summer versus winter. But if push came to shove, I'd be happy to go with 6 months.
Yeah, but would you consider just leaving the operating hours and see how they work rather than not give them a operating time frame? I mean, you're cutting them off at 10:30 as opposed to their 11:30 request. Maybe you should be trying the 6 monthly initially on the normal trading hours recommended.
That's how I understand it is. I'm not restricting them initially. I'm allowing them. In my discussions with Mr Wilton, I did want it to continue at 11:30 at the initial stages, and then if the complaints come in with cars leaving at 11:30, 11:45, if those issues are there, then it needs to be addressed and they need to come in to 10:30.
Okay, can I ask?
I don't know if we've got it.
No,
we're all confused about it.
Yeah, I think Mr Pepping would like to make a comment.
Through the chair, once you approve, if you issue a consent that has the hours in there, you can't change the consent and reduce the hours unless the applicant puts in an amendment application or modification application. So whatever is approved and the hours, they will stay there irrespective of whether or not there is an issue, unless the applicant wishes to modify the hours.
Well, I don't know how we'll address that, because there has been one neighbour that wrote in and said he wanted the hours at 10:30. So he needs to be satisfied with that.
Okay, then it might just come down to a voting pattern. Councillor Turland.
As I said before, when you go to page 81 and you read the second last paragraph, the current development application replies upon council approving the modification of DA1A/056001 currently before council to modify the consent. We are approving something before we've done the modification. It's clear on page 81, we should be dealing with the modification first, because that's what the two relate to. You cannot approve something now and then refuse the modification. They both go together.
No, Councillor Turland.
It is clear. Look at page
Councillor
81, second paragraph. It is wrong.
Excuse me. Councillor Turland.
Please answer the question, staff.
Through you. Now, we are in debate, so this is clarification. Mr Pepping.
Through the chair, Councillor Turlin is correct to an extent that the modification application does deal with modifying the original approved master plan for the site that addresses the content of this particular development application. So there is a degree of elements there. However, this development does include a much bigger thing. If this is approved as is, then the consideration of report 9.3 would be a mere formality.
Okay. But what I'm trying to say is clearly the modification should have been approved first, because in the second paragraph, it clearly says this relates to the modification. So if for some unknown reason we refuse the modification, which is the next one, we could not approve the DA.
Councillor Turlin, who is speaking? Anybody speaking against the recommendation or for the recommendation? Okay, then if that be the case, then we have the recommendation as moved by Councillor Scandrett, seconded by Councillor Whipper, that it be approved. Then we have the amendment moved by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor McLaughlin. All in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. Councillors McLaughlin, Markwart and Nelson. All against the amendment, please raise your hand. Councillors Turlin, Andrews, Whipper, Gare and Councillor Scandrett. I think that's not a bad idea, Councillor Scandrett, actually. So I declare the amendment lost. I now put the motion. All in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. Councillors Turlin, Andrews, Whipper, Scandrett, Markwart and Gare. I declare it carried. We now move over to 9.3, page 135.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, I don't think there's need for an introduction. Councillor Scandrett, seconded by Councillor Whipper. Is there any debate? Then
it doesn't matter. Well, inform Mr. Nash.
Mr. Nash, this is going through. You were probably watching this. This is no need for you to come on stream unless you wish. You do have that right.
He's already left.
He's already left. So I put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand.
I needed a question, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, question.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, does that mean that because the previous recommendation was approved, that the consideration of the hours of operation don't apply, or they do apply, whereas I'd put in an amendment to that effect?
Through the chair, the hours of operation wouldn't apply because this is an amendment to the master plan, which is purely about the built form, not the actual extension and operations.
Understand.
Okay, we'll now put the recommendation.
Well, page 138, it is. You can read it. The amendment relates to the opening hours of the restaurant. It's clearly there. Top third paragraph down from the top. So
yes,
it does relate to it. Page 138.
That was the.
That's the amendment.
Excuse me. Please don't keep just interrupting. Can we have Mr. Wilton to clarify, please?
Through the chair, that is correct. The hours of operation are contained within the master plan relating to those buildings. So those should be consistent between the actual DA approval and also the master plan, which they are.
Which they are.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, but Mr. Nelson asked the question.
Excuse me, Councillor Turlin. Will you please raise your hand if you want to speak? All in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hand.
Councillor, I wanted to ask a question.
Oh, where am I? Rick, are you?
Come on.
Councillor McLaughlin wants a question.
I didn't see your hand, Councillor McLaughlin.
Okay, thank you.
I am going to give everybody cards.
Yes.
And you will have something on that card that is more obvious sometimes when you put the hand in front of your face. I don't see it. Councillor McLaughlin, question.
Okay. So we've heard from staff, Mr. Mayor, with regard to once we pass these, hours are set in stone. I am sure in the past we have always put in something to do with a review if there is concerns about the hours of operation. Yeah. We've done that on many times with regard to items like this, and I don't see any reason why we can't add that, as you suggested, that after a 12-month period, if there are any concerns about the noise after this time, it be revisited by council.
Then Councillor McLaughlin, you are correct. The staff in all their recommendations give council a series of a report. If you wish to alter that report, I have never seen a staff report come to council saying it be reviewed. That is up to councillors. If you wish to put that in,
yes.
But you are, if you heard what Mr. Pepping said, you can't review it unless the applicant then requests it. Is that correct, Mr. Pepping?
Well, surely not.
The amendment was lost.
Okay, so the amendment was lost in relation to that for that very reason. It has to be the applicant that comes to council, not council. Yeah, look, I'll give it to Mr. Pepping to explain again.
Councillor, just for the sake of clarification, if you put in earlier times to close and everything worked out all right and the applicant had, or the operation received no complaints, the applicant would put in a modification to increase the hours that they previously sought. That's a 4.55 modification application. Council cannot impose the later times as a condition of consent, and then if we get complaints, we can't go back to the consent and vary the times because the consent is in place. Only the applicant can seek a modification to their consent.
Okay, so it wouldn't matter whether you do that or whether we do it or not, it would be up to the applicant.
Yeah, okay, we've lost it.
Okay. So it doesn't,
yeah, we've lost it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to put it all in favour of the recommendation as moved by Councillor Scandrett and Whipper. Please put your hand up. Councillor Andrews, Whipper, Scandrett, McLaughlin, Markward, Turland and Gare. Those against? Is your hand up or down, Councillor Nelson?
Can't see your head.
It's up.
Ah, he's against. We're going to have to do...
I'm against because... I'm against because...
You voted against. We can't...
Yeah, well, I've been dudded.
We're moving on to point 11.1, sale of property, Franklin Street, that would be considered enclosed.
Move that way.
Move Councillor McLaughlin, second Councillor Scandrett.
No, Mr. Mayor.
What? You got a question?
Yes, you asked us to lodge declarations of interest. I'd just like to record that I had a phone call today from the applicant. I declined to discuss the matter with him and I'm going to put in a form. Thank you.
So
I'll second it now.
No, are you declaring an interest?
No, I'm not. It's a non-significant, less than significant, non-pecuniary.
Okay, then you're declaring a less than significant interest, non-pecuniary. Okay, Councillor McLaughlin.
I'll do the same, Mr. Mayor. I received a phone call from the gentleman in question.
So you're putting in a can you please declare what you're doing?
Oh, well, a less than significant non-pecuniary interest, as I received a phone call as well.
Okay, then you put that. A little bit. But Councillor Turlin.
I can tell you I didn't get a phone call. so I have no interest.
All right, point taken. Neither did some other people. Okay, then I put who's going to move that to go into close?
Well,
Yes, it will, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, still happy to move it to go into close.
Councillor McLaughlin and Scandrett, all in favour, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, it's carried. It's going into close. 11.2, Noble Coronavirus Community Financial Support Package. This is we've discussed. We went through it on Monday. Somebody like to move it? Move Councillor Nelson.
No, Mr. Mayor, I'd like an introduction from Mr. Mooney.
Yes, same, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mooney.
Just before I'm going to declare a conflict of interest, and it's a pecuniary interest because I play rates in the Wingecarribee.
No, that is not a pecuniary interest.
It is a pecuniary interest.
Councillor Turland, will you please allow me to explain? The Local Government Act does not require councillors not to vote or declare an interest because they own a place that pays rates. Otherwise, we'd never be able to set a budget. That's it in a nutshell. So you don't have...
Firstly, if I wish to, I will, and I have, so you can mute me, please.
Okay, well, you can ask not to be part of it.
I've just said that. I will not be part of it.
Okay.
So I have to.
Yep. If you wish to be muted, then we will.
So, Mr. Mayor, can I clarify? We're putting Councillor Turland in the waiting room.
Okay. You did feel that you have a pecuniary interest. Have you filled out a form to that effect, Councillor Turland? Have you? Can you unmute yourself? Councillor Turland.
Don't do it. It's blocked. Anyway, yeah, go on.
Have you filled out a form declaring that as a pecuniary interest? There it is. Fine. Then we will put you in the lobby, as its so-called term. You will be taken offline for a time. There has been a request that Mr. Mooney give an introduction. Mr. Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, and good evening, councillors. Councillors, report 11.2. The purpose of the report is to obtain formal council approval for the range of financial support measures that council has announced in relation to novel corona COVID-19 global pandemic. Councillors, the whole of Australia would be aware of the significance of the date 22nd of March 2020 when the Prime Minister announced an extensive range of measures to limit the spread of the COVID-19 virus across communities within Australia. Councillors, the Southern Highlands has taken those measures particularly hard in terms of the impact that has had on the Southern Highlands as a premier tourism destination. Subsequent to the announcement made by the Prime Minister on the 22nd of March, council officers received a significantly high number of calls and inquiries from business houses and residents affected by the enforced closures seeking certainty and some assurances around what steps council would take to assist them through the current pandemic. Councillors, a range of measures were developed and put forward for, in principle, support to council on the 1st of April. Obviously, given the unique circumstances regarding the pandemic and the need to provide our community, both our business houses and our broader community, with certainty within a responsive time frame, those measures were supported by council in principle, albeit with the need for a formal report to be submitted, which is the case and the purpose of this report. Councillors, in summary, there are 5 key measures which have been announced by council in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll just quickly speak to each of those measures. The first measure, councillors, relates to the removal of all interest charges on overdue rates and charges for a period of 12 months, commencing 1st of April 2020. The second key measure relates to a rates deferral period for a period of 6 months for all business rated properties which were affected by the enforced shutdowns, or where they were the property owner of a business and provided a rent deferral period for a business that was affected by the enforced closure. Again, that rate deferral was for a period of 6 months up to the 1st of April. In conjunction with that rate deferral for business owners, there was also a rate deferral period which was approved for property owners who had either lost employment or been stood down as a result of the federal government's enforced business closures for a period of 6 months. Importantly, councillors, where those two key measures differ from our existing financial hardship and revenue-related policies, is that we have proposed that we will allow for a 3-year payment pathway for residents who have made application due to the impact of COVID-19. That's recognising, councillors, that whilst optimistically the broader economy and the economy within the Southern Highlands will bounce within ideally and optimistically a 6 to 12 month period, but the lasting effects on local businesses and local communities will be much longer than that. We believe that providing a much more reasonable and sustainable pathway to allow business houses and affected community members to, for all intents and purposes, catch up on outstanding arrears is a much more meaningful gesture to assist our community in managing their cash flows, both in the short term and the long term. The third key measure, councillors, was the provision of a rental subsidy for a period of 6 months for all council-owned properties which were occupied by a small business or organisation impacted by the federal government's enforced close down. And again, that rental subsidy was a full rental subsidy for a period of 6 months. In addition to that, key measure number 4, councillors, provide a full fee reduction for all outdoor dining fees, materials on footpaths and environment and health inspections commencing 1st of April. And that's largely reflecting the downturn in retail trade and cafe trade and hospitality trade, and recognising that effectively those businesses would have limited cash flow to be able to meet any of those payments. So again, that's a full fee reduction. And the fifth key measure there, councillors, as you'll see in the report, is to provide a 6-month deferral period for the repayment of interest-free loans which are currently held with community and sporting organisation. Again, that's going a long way to recognising that aside from our business houses and our affected community members, that also our community groups are finding it very difficult during these times in terms of having to manage their cash flows and ensuring that their priorities working with their members and also not having to be unsure or uncertain as to where council sits in terms of the measures that it's released. Councillors, on page 176, you'll also see detailed a raft of initiatives that have been rolled out by our economic development and tourism teams, Destination Southern Highlands, who have been working closely with local chambers of commerce and other industry groups to make sure that businesses are aware of what schemes are available to support them through the current pandemic, and also to provide additional training aids such as how local businesses can take advantage of technology such as the technology we're using tonight, councillors, to make sure that they are able to respond and still engage with their marketplaces during a time where physical contact has been severely limited. Councillors, in terms of the budget impact of the proposed package, a conservative estimate has been calculated at $700,000. Now, where that figure has arrived from is that they are essentially adjustments that we will need to factor into our budget, both in the short term in our current budget and also in our 2021 budget. We've taken a very cautious and conservative approach to how we've developed those estimates. And as outlined on the report on page 177, as in council officers, will be briefing councillors immediately following the Finance Committee next Wednesday on not only the funding mechanisms that we will be looking at introducing as a result of the financial support package, but also outlining to councillors the impact on council as an organisation, as a business, as a result of the economic downturn, which is presented as a result of the pandemic. Councillors, just would like to stress in summarising and bringing the report to a conclusion, the reason for obviously taking the proposal to the community prior to seeking formal adoption, as it is a very unusual approach for us to take, but it was very much about providing certainty to our community and our business houses. Our role at the moment, our number one priority should be providing them with certainty as to making sure that their cash flows, which are critical at this point in time, go where they're needed, whether that be employing staff, making sure that their essential energy bills and the like are able to be met, with the full knowledge that council has put in place a responsible plan which allows them to look at deferring rates and other charges, and to build that into their future cash flow models, hopefully at a time when our economy is able to bounce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mooney. Very comprehensive response to the question. So is there any question? Please, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Scandrett, you'll have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I'm just doing that now, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. For Mooney, thank you. Just reading here. Clarification, in section 5, it says materials on footpaths. Does that include A-boards and sail tables and the like? And can I change that in the motion, please?
No.
No.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, correct, that does. It's a more generalised term that we've used to ensure that we capture all of those items. Rest assured, councillor, that we certainly have made sure that we've captured A-boards and the like within that particular mechanism.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. I know that the access rules on our footpath will preside, but otherwise I think we've got to encourage people to enter or at least be enticed into our shops. And I say that as a shopkeeper of many years. Second question, Mr. Mayor.
No, Councillor Scandrett, not a second question.
Well,
Councillor, no, look, we're on a
there's a number of properties that are already vacant in the Highlands.
Thank you. I will see if other councillors wish to ask questions. First, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, just clarification that we're not writing off the insurance for those billboards that are on the footpaths.
Mr. Mooney, through you, Madam General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, as for clarity on that, what we are waiving is the fees associated with placing those particular items on the footpaths. Those fees will be waived and are the fees that are adopted in line with our fees and charges document.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Councillor Markward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for Mr. Mooney. These measures will cost council real money, for want of a better term. So do you believe this is the best fit in terms of balance for providing short-term value to businesses and such like who require some assistance, and the longer-term value of residents who require, of course, continuing services? Thank you. It's a Dorothy Dix question.
Thank you, Councillor Markward. Mr. Mooney.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. at the risk of, agreeing with the comments that you've made there, Councillor, I'm sure that there will be members of our community who believe that we can do more. There will always be that case, I'm sure. What we believe we have presented to Council tonight, and when I say we, the General Manager and the two Deputy General Managers, is a responsible package which gives certainty to the members of our community who have been most impacted by the current pandemic. And in saying that, it is targeted. So yeah, I do believe that through a targeted specific program, this is the best way for Council to respond at the current point in the pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a recommendation. So move Councillor Scandrett.
Mr. Mayor, I still would like to ask that second part of my question and then move it. Thank you.
Your second part of the question, Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mooney, part 2 there, it says for business rated properties where tenants have suffered impact, etc. But there are a number of properties that are now vacant in the Shire. Will you be extending that same thing to that? And if so, can we insert the words "and vacant properties"?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll answer that question in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. If there is a property that has been vacated as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, then they will simply be able to apply for the 6-month deferral and quite easily, I'm sure, be able to demonstrate the enforced shutdown is in line with the federal government's directive. Where there are other cases which aren't as necessarily as clear cut as that. So for example, hypothetically, and I will stress the point there, hypothetically, if there are properties that have been vacated and have been empty for several months prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we will work with those respective property owners. And I think, as I made clear on Monday, Councillor, when we spoke to this item in the business paper review, is that we are taking a very empathetic view as to how we can help all members of our community. But in doing so, we also have to make sure, as I said, that our assistance is targeted to those who most need it. So
well, I think that's a fair enough point. We've got to move on. I want to move in a second up. Move Councillor Scandrett, second to Councillor McLaughlin. And before this is voted on, the staff, and I know people say, oh, well, that's their job. The speed that the staff reacted to this and the putting together that went out to the community, I think we were, if we weren't the first in the state, but by gee, we were very close up there in the top few. So thank you, and thank you to the councillors who responded, knowing that this would have to come back to council for ratification. But it was a positive move the council did, and thank you for being a part of it. So moved by Councillor Scandrett, seconded by Councillor McLaughlin. Everybody in favour, please raise your hand. Carried unanimously, thank you. And we will ask Councillor Turlin to resume. He's back. So we are moving on to 11.3.
Move that, Mr. Mayor. Move that way.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Move Councillor McLaughlin, seconded.
My hand is up, Mr. Mayor.
Bad luck.
I am called Councillor McLaughlin. Sorry, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor McLaughlin, seconded.
Make up your mind. Do we put up our hands or do we just speak?
Thanks.
I did both at the same time.
If you wait, right, you can say, no, I don't want to second it or whatever. I have moved and Councillor McLaughlin said he would move it and you put your hand up and you have seconded it. Is there anybody who wishes to speak to it?
Mr. Mayor, could I ask a question?
Question from Councillor Whipper. Thank you, Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to this, I know the existing lease had a provision in it where it called upon, I think it was a 20% donation towards land care and the preservation of that endangered ecological community. Could I just check that that clause is still held within the lease?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. No more debate. Then I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. We have a unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on to 11.4, proposed Crown Reserve Part East Street, Robertson. Mover. Moved Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Turlin. Any discussion? Introduction, please. Want an introduction? Mr. Wilson? No, Mr.
That'd be me, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mooney.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, councillors, report 11.4 is in relation to a proposed transfer of a Crown Road, Part East Street in Robertson. Councillors, we are seeking your approval to make application to the New South Wales Department of Planning and Industry and Environment for the transfer of the Crown Road. Reason being, councillors, we are currently finalising the design works to construct a flood protection levee along the length of the northern boundary of the unformed road. The design is almost complete and construction is aimed to be completed before the end of the current financial year. Prior to commencing construction works, it's necessary for us to formalise the transfer of the Crown Road to Council as Roads Authority so that the works can be undertaken. The other option would be that we would look to enter into a short-term lease agreement with the Crown, but that in itself would become problematic and also would probably be more time consuming than applying for the road to be transferred to council. Simply an administrative report which will allow us to get on with our works program and specific works within that location within Robertson.
Thank you. Any questions to Mr. Mooney? Councillor Whipper. Question, Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mooney, you mentioned the design works that are being prepared. Could you tell me if those design works include the sealing of the eastern end of North Street, which is being affected by water and flooding in the past? Could you clarify that for me?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I may need to direct that at Mr. Paul, or Mr. Paul may need to take that on notice.
Mr. Paul will respond.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Whipper, I don't believe that is part of the project at this stage, no.
All right, okay, I'll take that on board and we can discuss that later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have that. Do we have moved by Councillor McLaughlin, seconded by Councillor Turlin? All in favour, please raise your hand. We have 5. We have a unanimous. Thank you. We move on to page 186, item 11.5, post-exhibition report, proposed closure corner of Gladstone Road and Queen Street, Bowral. Now, we've inspected this. Moved Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Nelson. Any discussion? Councillor Scandred, have you a question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Could we have an introduction on this that explains how we ended up having to dedicate a road reserve?
Oh, right. We've this one I hope will be put to bed after this. 2.2 square metres I've just been informed. So it's not a big piece of land. Do you still want an introduction?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor, because it's
okay,
obviously...
Thank you. I will hand it over to Mr. Pepping.
Oh, I don't care.
Mr. Pepping.
This is just the administrative tidying up.
Councillors, through the chair, when the original development and the retaining wall on the corner of Gladstone and Queen Street was constructed, There was concerns about the stability of that wall. Through negotiations with the developer, the majority of the wall was removed and reconstructed. A small portion of the original wall, which is the little bit that we're talking about now, remained in place, and it encroached into the road reserve, as we know, Queen Street and Gladstone Street. So in total, it's just a fraction over 2 square metres, 2.2 square metres of the section of road that is proposed to be closed. Once it's closed, that particular area will be transferred into the residential property adjoining that section.
Okay, any questions from that? Councillor Markward and then Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question for Mr. Pepping. Was there a cheaper or more effective way to achieve this result? Thank you.
Through the chair, no, the majority of the process that we went through involved the developer having to reconstruct the majority of the wall. This little bit that was remaining, there wasn't really any cost-effective process to reconstruct that section, and we were happy with the result that we ended up with in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin, and then Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, through you, Madam GM, to Mr. Pepping. With regard to this development, I believe there's still only 2 of the blocks that have been developed. Have we kept some money in reserve to facilitate more actions, if required, with regard to the stormwater issues that devastated that area?
Through the chair, at the present time, I think it's a 5-lot subdivision. It's been done in stages. So there's the 2 lots that front onto Queen Street and the corner of Gladstone Street is part of stage 1. So stage 2 hasn't been finalised as yet, but yes, we do hold a bond to oversee the completion of the development.
Yeah, I would suggest we hang on to that and make sure that everything is done.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Major, the 7 people that wrote back in submissions, can you give us a quick summary on what the most concerns were? Was it the curb and gutter, or was it the transfer of the of that 2.5 square metres?
Through
reading it, all about footpaths and about curb and gutters. It's not about the corner.
Thank you, Mr. Pepping.
Through the chair, look, the report was actually done by Mr. Mooney and his team, and they did a summary of it. But in reality, the majority of the submissions that were received were to do with the development that has progressed over the last 5 years, as opposed to the actual closure of the road. There are some concerns up there by the residents, and they seem to filter through this process when it really wasn't part of the actual road closure process.
But did we have community consultation in relation to the curb and gutter that was done?
Good question.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, moved by Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Nelson. All in favour, raise your hand. Carried, no. All but Councillor Scandrett. Thank you.
And I'd like to record my opposition to this. It was a debacle.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett.
Have it recorded, please.
Exhibition report, road closure, part Stockade Street, Berrima. Now, this one's been dragging on too. Somebody willing to move it? Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor Turlin. Any discussion?
Put the motion.
Put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. Carried. Everybody except Councillor Scandrett. We move to page 204, post-exhibition report, Sutton Highlands Botanic Gardens.
I move.
Moved Councillor Scandrett, seconded Councillor Whipper. Any discussion? Put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. Carried unanimously. We move to 11.8. Post exhibition report, proposed lease of Landlock Reserve, Kirkland Street, Moss Vale. Somebody like to move it? Councillor Whipper, seconded. Councillor Turley. This one's created a bit of angst amongst the neighbours. And no discussion. Put it.
Question.
Councillor Scandron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a lease, so there's no development opportunity and there's no intention to sell it in due course. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation from officers is that we actually decline the short-term lease. So the second part of that question regarding development really doesn't need to be responded to. The recommendation is based on the submissions that we received during the public exhibition period, that the best course of action for officers to present to the council is that we decline the lease and we allow the planning proposal, which I believe a public meeting was held via Zoom and via Facebook last night. We allow that planning proposal to go through its due course.
Thank you, Councillor Mr. Mooney. No further questions. Then I put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. Carried unanimously. Thank you. We move on to number 9, 11.9, investment report, February 2020. Somebody like to move that? Move Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Is there any discussion? I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. Can I ask Councillor to raise the hand in favour? Carried unanimously. We move to 11.10, investment report for March 20. Somebody move it. Councillor Mark Ward, seconded. Councillor Turlin.
Question.
Councillor Turlin.
We've spent $2 million, the difference between February and March. Can you explain where the $2 million has gone?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to do so would probably take me much longer than time will permit for this particular meeting. Councillor, obviously, is a large organisation that runs a budget of approximately $130 million cash expenditure budget. We have a range of ongoing commitments to meet to both our suppliers and also to our employees. You'll note within the report that obviously the reduction in cash was also largely due to the fact that there were the absence of rate and water instalments during that same period. So the reduction in our cash flows of that amount is not something that should nor would it draw any concern given the magnitude and the size of our operations, Councillor.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, no other questions. So it was moved by Councillor Mark Ward and Councillor Turlin. Put it. All in favour, raise your hand. Councillors, all councillors except Councillor Scandron, who has left the room. We move on to development applications determined. 12.1, page 232 to 24th of February.
Happy to move that, Mr. Mayor.
Move Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor Whipper. Any discussion? Then I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. All in favour, please raise your hand. Councillors, except Councillor Scandron, who is still not available. 12.2, development applications received from 24th of February to the 27th of April 2020. Somebody like to move it?
Councillor Scandron's back.
Councillor Scandron has returned. Councillor Mark Ward moved, seconded Councillor Whipper. Any questions? No questions, then I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. All carried unanimously, and it doesn't seem to have stopped the DAs from coming in since April last year for new houses. 13.1, exclusion of question with no...
No, 12.3.
280.
280.
What page are we on, Mr. Mayor?
By Council to the General Manager and Council's Bush Care Program to undertake regeneration activities.
Happy to move that, Mr. Mayor.
Move Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor Scandrett. Any discussion? No discussion, then I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. Carried unanimously. We move to 12.4, draft councillor information sessions code.
I'd like to move an amendment, Mr. Mayor.
No, there is won't be an amendment if you move
a motion, Mr. Mayor. It is, and that is that the matter be deferred until we meet again in chamber.
Do you have a seconder?
I believe
yes.
I do.
Yep. Yes.
Yes, Councillor Turley. Councillor Scandrett, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it's largely irrelevant, this motion. Not that I agree with it, but it's irrelevant because here we are on a Zoom meeting and there are no briefings happening in person with councillors and staff. So I propose that we defer it to when it's appropriate. I'm sure that everyone would agree with this, that it is something for in-person meetings.
Then I'll speak against it. Because,
so would I.
Because it doesn't matter. Even when we return, some breaches will probably occur that have occurred before, and there is no reason not to do it. And you don't know when the Premier will allow the change of distancing or council meetings or council information sessions. Yes, Councillor Nelson, then Councillor Whipper. So I'm going to strongly support through what has happened in the past that this motion be adopted by council. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, there's lots of administrative work that has to be undertaken once council approves this. And I agree with all the comments that you've said. So I'll be voting against that and be supporting the recommendation.
Well, somebody's got to move the recommendation.
I'll move.
Is it a direct negative?
No, it's not a direct negative. I'm happy to move the original motion as an amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Move Councillor Whipper, second Councillor Nelson.
Yep, second it.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Yep, okay, that's fine.
Okay, do you wish to speak? Sorry, you had your hand up. No?
Well, I'm happy to speak.
Spoken.
It's that you have spoken.
Well, if nobody else is speaking, I'll wrap up.
No, well, then you can have your right of reply, yes.
Yeah, 2 in favour, 2 against seems to be...
Before you go, Councillor Whipper wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Speaking to the amendment, I agree with what you've said, Mr. Mayor. There's no reason at all, unless it's one of mischief, to hold this motion back, this recommendation back. I think we need to put it in place. We will come out of COVID. We will have to resume our meeting practices. And I think that in terms of our briefings, there does need to be a framework around that. So I'm encouraging councillors to adopt this tonight and move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Scandrett, your right of reply.
Well, it's a very sad day, councillors, when we sit here saying we are going to go further and further into a closed council mentality here, when we advocate that we are a transparent consulting and caring council, and yet our actions say the least. I mean, this is simply a beat up. This is a gagging of what should often be just in the chamber. and I've said this regularly, a lot of these briefings should be in public. The late Ted Mack advocated for this very successfully and went through 3 levels of government because of his open stance. He endorsed me for council, and he had a very strong position on this, very strong, thank you, Graham, very strong position that nothing should be not in chambers unless it was legal or staff. And I asked him about this once, and he said, well, as it so happens, we never had a legal or a staff matter that was there. But particularly matters of great concern, such as development in North Sydney and so on, they went through the chamber. If it was good enough to be briefed to the councillors, it was good enough to be briefed to the public. So I say this is very regrettable. This is shades of Big Brother, because here we are planning to make everything confidential. Now, I say the opposite. Everything should be open and transparent. And guess what? That's what we say in our mission statement. We say that we seek to communicate, to be transparent, to be open, and the like. So I think this is a retrograde step. I don't think the public will receive it very well, because they will say, well, what is it that's going on in there that is going to now be under a code? They'll say that. I would say the opposite. Bring it all into the chamber, or onto Zoom if you must. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. All in favour of the amendment as moved by Councillors Whipper and Nelson, please raise your hand. All against?
On the record, Mr. Mayor, an absolute no. Absolute no.
Against?
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Raise your hand, Councillor Scandrett. Are you voting for or against, Councillor Turlin? Are you voting, Councillor Turlin? No. Okay, so take that. And
be recorded against.
The amendment becomes the motion. I now put the motion. All in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. All councillors the same way. Those against?
And again recorded as a no.
And Councillor Turlin refrained from voting. So that is vote taken in the negative. We move to 2 point.
Shame.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett, that it had to come to this. 298, 13.1, exclusion of questions with notice from the business paper. The recommendation is the report be noted. Moved. Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Andrews. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, of course, this report means nothing to anyone watching or reading it, because they don't know what the question was or who it was from. It's a farce.
No, because it was deemed not to be permissible. So that is why there's no name or author.
Well, I don't think there's a problem with the name and the author. It's the content that you're talking about, not the name and the author.
And the content. It was.
Right. So why is the name of the author of the notice of motion or the question?
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett, for the simple reason, okay, of what it says. I put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. All councillors, those against? Councillors Turlin and Scandrett, otherwise all for. I declare it carried. We move to 13.2, exclusion of notice of rescission from business paper, like a mover and a seconder. Somebody move.
Same objection, Mr. Mayor.
Nelson and Andrews.
I'd like to talk.
Councillor Turlin. You can't. You cannot. You can only refer to it in general terms without any specifics.
I understand the rules pretty well. Not that I can see anybody on my screen, but anyway, it seems to me that there's only one person who becomes the judge, the jury, and the executioner with what council's put forward. And so there is no way that we can actually bring it to a third party to have it looked at. So we have one person that makes the decision. Now, that is not good governance at all. It might be good governance if you want to control free speech. But we as councillors have every right to ask a question that isn't thrown out by using the so-called, the implication of unlawful against a staff member. How do we bring anything to the attention of everybody, the public and council, if we can't bring it to the attention through this process? As I said, we have one person that makes the judgment on what that person thinks is lawful or not, regardless if it's believed to be a statement against a staff member. It is not correct. It is not right to have one person as the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And that is my view.
Fair enough, that's your point, but it has to meet a criteria that is set down by the Office of Local Government on what the criteria requesting can be put to council. And if that does not meet that criteria, which the Office of Local Government has upheld, and they're the ones who write the guidelines, then it is determined to be non-permissible. And that was checked out. And
confidential part of the
and will be discussed later on in the confidential part of the meeting. So there is a process and rules, and if it doesn't meet the rules, then it's not permissible.
In your opinion?
Well, not in my opinion, Councillor Turland, in the opinion of the Office of Local Government. My opinion counts for naught, really. Councillor Markward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if this is a point of order, but I'd just like to comment that I believe that use of the term of judge, jury and executioner is rather inappropriate in this instance. Just like to record that.
Okay, you've made just a point. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, if you read the report, it says there, or the implementation of business would be unlawful. So whatever the councillor is putting forward, whichever councillor it may be, if it's considered unlawful, then the general manager has an obligation not to put it before council and the public. And that's what's happened here.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Okay, is there any more debate?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Scandon.
Mr. Mayor, I share similar concerns to Councillor Turland, because again, here we are advocating we're a open and caring, consultative, transparent council. Well, I don't think it's funny, Councillor Nelson. I think it's sad. And you as an administrator, dear me. Anyway, closed shop. Yes, it is. The public actually, I think, look at this and just shake their heads. So again, they want to know what is concerning councillors, and yet the gag comes in. I don't get why it is confidential to withhold the name of the person who, the councillor, I should say, in this case, who may have lodged these matters, councillors. I just don't get it. Does somebody want to comment on why that should be confidential?
Well, my understanding would be it'd be not lawful.
Well, I'd like the GM to comment on it, please. Hello, GM.
Hello, Councillor. I think you need to read the Code of Conduct and the Code of Meeting Practice, as I do when I receive a question with notice or a notice of motion. And I check each of those against the criteria in both of those codes. And I make a judgment call in relation to that. I would refer you, and we can discuss this further when we get to the confidential part of the meeting, where there is a letter that I think councillors may wish to consider.
And Madam GM, I'd like that too, but I can't get answers out of you from letters I send in 3 days ago.
Thank you, Councillor Scandon. Any further discussion? Then I put the recommendation that was moved by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favour, please raise your hand. All councillors save Councillors Scandrett and Kelvin.
Recording my dissent for both of these, please.
Declare it carried.
Recording my consent, my dissent, I should say. Mr. Mayor, I'd like you to acknowledge that.
Noted.
It's noted. We note everything. Your name is automatically.
Then just please give me the courtesy of acknowledging my request.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. It is acknowledged.
13.3,
page 300. Private and confidential correspondence from the Office of Local Government.
Move that way, Mr. Mayor.
Move Councillor.
The recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Whipper. Is there any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Scandrett.
Well, again, this appears to be a very interesting letter because it covers things that should be in the public eye.
You cannot discuss.
I know exactly what I can't do, Mr. Mayor, and I note that the author of the letter from the OLG says that quite precisely. But I have to say that what is in that letter, in my opinion, is in the public interest. Right? Now I've got to observe. Please don't interrupt. Please.
No, excuse me. I am saying you please do not continue.
You're gagging me.
It is read the letter.
Yes, and I'm speaking about the action of. This is about a motion to move it into closed.
Councillor Scandrett.
I'm speaking against it going into closed.
Right.
I'm speaking against it.
Okay, thank you. You've made your point.
Thank you.
Then I put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. All except Councillors Scandrett and Kelly. Those against. Councillors Turlin and Scandrett. Councillor Scandrett would like his name recorded.
Thank you.
13.4, page 301, the legal report. So we have to move one, then go into closed.
1 and 2.
1 and 2. Somebody prepared to move, but Councillor McLaughlin and Whipper. Any discussion? Councillor Scandrett.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, could we have an update on the matter of the old spare parts property in Bong Bong Street South, which I think was to go to the Land Environment Court for its initial hearing?
The updated in closed committee.
No, I just want to know if the hearing took place. I presume it was a camera hearing.
It will be discussed in closed committee. Then I put the recommendation. Councillor Mark Watt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of clarification on process. I note that one councillor, or maybe two councillors, insist on having their vote recorded, but people in the positive don't have that. So I'm just wondering, do we have to actually acknowledge a vote one way or the other, or do we just record it? Because when we get the minutes next meeting, we can, of course, correct any inconsistencies. I'm just finding it rather annoying.
Yeah, my understanding is if a councillor insists that their name be recorded against the motion, then it be done.
It's only planning that we have.
Councillor Markwood, other councils record all the votes on every matter. It's easy to do.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett.
Question.
Excuse me. Let me not. The only time that all councillors have to have their name recorded is on planning matters. Other than that, if it is the majority, then it is just carried, unless a councillor particularly wants their name recorded. Councillor Turl.
I have not asked for my name to be recorded on both occasions, thank you.
They weren't.
They weren't. As far as I'm aware, it was only Councillor Scandrett.
It was brought to the attention that I did, but I haven't.
Thank you.
Point of order. I didn't mention Councillor Turlin's name at all.
Mr. Mayor, procedurally, is it correct that a resolution of council would enable all votes to be recorded, like other councils do?
Only if council by way of resolution, I would expect under code of meeting practice.
That's correct. Thank you. Thank
you. Mr. Paul would like to make a comment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors have the opportunity to have all votes recorded on a matter. You need to call for a division and actually formally vote for a division. If you call for a division and the council agrees for a division, then all votes are recorded, both for and against. Beyond that, all planning matters are required to be recorded, as the Mayor has indicated. Legislation requires that. So you would need to call for a division on each occasion.
I hope it doesn't quite get to that, okay? I'm quite happy to allow those names who wish to be recorded against to be recorded. So we put the recommendation as moved by Councillor McLaughlin and Whipper. All in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, carried. We move on to 13.5. Legal report.
It's the same, it's just an update in the same resolution.
So we move and seconder.
Nelson.
Move Nelson and Councillor Nelson and Markwart. All in favour, please raise your hand. Against, carried. We move over to minutes of the Heritage Advisory Committee 16.1. Councillor, who's moving that? Councillor McLaughlin and Councillor Nelson. Any discussion on it? And I put it all in favour. Those all in favour, you've got to raise your hands, I'm sorry. All in favour, those that are carried, those against, carried. 16.2, minutes of the Environment and Sustainability Committee. Well, move Councillor Whipper, secondly Councillor Markwart. You had a fairly comprehensive meeting that day by the look of it, Councillor Whipper.
Question?
We did indeed, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Question?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. It says there in item 1 that two councillors be nominated to work with council staff to develop the terms of reference. Does that need to be done tonight or down the track?
I'll go to the chair, Councillor Whipper.
I think there'd be an advantage in doing it tonight. It'll just put it on the record. Obviously, Councillor Markwart and myself were assuming that we might be nominated for those roles.
I'd be happy with that.
Okay, if you could.
Well, do you want to wait next meeting?
No. It saves us bringing a report back.
Oh,
so do it now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're happy with that, and Councillor Markwart, are you happy with that? So Councillor Whipper and Markwart, thank you, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. Happy to include that in the recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Okay, so that the delegates be Councillors Whipper and Markwart.
Yeah, nominated.
Councillor Scandrick has his hand up. I don't know if it's a question.
Councillor Scandrick, question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I noticed the comments on extinction. It was a rebellion, and Scott Gibson was the speaker. Is it correct that he's now left Extinction Rebellion, Mr. Whipper, Councillor Whipper?
Not being of a rebellious nature, Councillor, I couldn't tell you that. I don't speak for Mr. Gibson. Yeah.
I believe he has, just to let you know.
Okay, well, that is the supposition. Councillor Markwart.
Just to clarify, this is only my knowledge of maybe a month or so ago. I believe Extinction Rebellion as such has had a small reduction in size, but I do believe a month ago Scott is still involved, but I'm not certain as of today.
Okay, then I think we leave this go through to the keeper and make no comment any further on it. But we have those two nominations, and as moved by Councillor
Whipper and Markwart.
Whipper and Markwart, then I put it. All in favour, please raise your hands. So that is carried. And we move on to 16.3, minutes of the Traffic Committee held electronically on Monday, the 2nd of March.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor...
Who's moving it?
Councillor Halstead's not here that would normally move it, and I think that the arrangements, if you read the report, the arrangements are over, so rather than be adopted, it probably should be noted, Mr Mayor.
Good point.
The minutes have got to be adopted.
You've still got to adopt the minutes as a true and correct record.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Look.
So all you have to do is move. Yes, Councillor Scandal.
Thank you. Right, I'll move it.
Excuse me, councillors. Councillor Nelson, are you moving it?
Yes, happy to move it then.
Okay, can I have a seconder for the minutes? Yes. Councillor Whipper. Now, questions to the minutes. Councillor Scandal.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess the question will go to Mr Paul. In terms of the Extinction Rebellion rally that was held in Bowral, was that the subject of a formal consent from the Traffic Committee, or was it a last-minute matter?
Through you, Mr Mayor, there was no application made for that particular event. The advice that council officers gave was not adhered to in terms of making an application.
Okay, but the police were part of that. They were consulted, Mr Paul.
Not by us.
No, the Traffic Committee was not consulted, as I've said.
I'm just saying to you that the police were directly consulted because they were there. Thank you.
No idea.
No idea. This is council. Okay, so I don't think council would speak on behalf of the police. Councillor Marport.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just seeking clarity of process again. Is it possible for councillors to second the minutes of a meeting they didn't attend?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. I stand corrected.
Whether it's ethical or morally correct, but you can do it.
I'm not commenting on anyone's morals. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, carry. We move over to 16.4, page 332, minutes of the Environment Sustainability Extraordinary Meeting on 18th of March. Move Councillor Whipper, second Councillor Markward. Is there any discussion to it?
Mr Mayor, I did ask in relation to this meeting, we're nominating projects for the expenditure of the $100,000 bushfire relief or recovery funds. And I just wanted to know, given that we haven't had any meetings, whether or not any of this money for these projects has been expended as yet.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, through the chair, councillor, we'll put together a weekly circular for all councillors for this Friday with an update on where those particular items are up to.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Whipper, I'm just reading your minutes.
Yep.
And, on the Balmoral Reserve, if you go to just above Wigelow Recreational Reserve, it says,
yep,
given the significant threatened species issues on the site, it is not a certainty that a park will legally be able to be established on this site despite the council resolution to do so. What was the feeling of the Environment Committee in relation to that comment?
Well, I think that was something, Mr Mayor, that did come up through our staff, and it was in relation to the status of the actual land. So I don't know that the committee itself, and I may be corrected by Councillor Markward, I don't know that there was a definite position. Obviously, they were open to any of those concerns by council if there was a restriction due to the zoning, and I think it may be Crown land. I think we were just waiting for advice on that, and there may be the villages of Balmoral may have located another site that may be preferential to that. So it's over to our council staff to investigate that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, then I'll ask Mr. Pepping if we can get an update on that in the report, please. Okay, thank you, Councillor Whipper. Any discussion in relation to that move by Councillor Whipper and Markwart? I put it. Councillor Scandrett, you wish for a question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Well, you and I attended the community recovery meeting up at Balmoral, where it was made quite clear that village green, as they call it, is highly desired. In fact, there's $93,000 in our reserves allocated towards that, in addition to the $100,000 that we took from the federal money to progress that park. And it's there's quite a strong feeling up there that it should be progressed. But any issues that are on that village green are also the same as around the hall and on public lands there, Mr. Mayor, as we saw. And there are, in fact, as another issue of risk there, of the pines and the fruit pine that are outside the hall, which of course aren't part of our risk strategy for fires. It's a timber hall. So I think if the staff could address that in their advice to us, I think they'll find there's quite a strong feeling there.
Yes, well, that probably not at that time, Councillor Scandrett, but you are right. And that's why I'm wanting to get the feeling from the Environment Committee, because I am very aware, and we all are, of the push for the that reserve to be progressed. So we'll just have to see where it goes in relation to the legalities of being able to do it all. I mean,
Mr. Mayor,
Councillor Whipper is chair, then you, Councillor Scandrett.
Look, I know that the staff are communicating very closely with the villages of Balmoral. As I said, the Environment Committee didn't take a position, but obviously we're bound by legislation and any vegetation sort of legislation that's out there as well. But I'm sure that that we'd support, obviously, the objectives and the feelings of the villages of Balmoral, and talk to whoever we need to appropriately to achieve an acceptable outcome for everybody. So at this stage, it's something between staff and villages of Balmoral. So I don't think that we need to go any deeper into it at this point in time.
Well, yes, I endorse that. Councillor Scandrett, last comment.
Well, I do think we do, and we had a presentation from the President of the Village Association, Miss Atkin, on this in chambers downstairs. Very clear that that is what they're looking for. In fact, they need some ray of sunshine in Winslow. It's been such an impact, and this has been a project that we...
Balmoral.
Oh, sorry, Balmoral, you're quite correct. And Balmoral, we allocated $93,000 to this some 10 years ago, and when a full assessment was done. So the archives will show that the reserve was capable of being delivered at that time.
Okay, thank you. Things have progressed since then, but we are all in favour of some improvement for the reserve down there. There's no question. Okay, so we have the recommendation as moved by Councillors Whipper and Markwart. I put it all in favour. Please raise your hand. All councillors, save Councillor Scandrett, who will have his name recorded against it. We move to 16.5 minutes of the order.
You need to clarify that, please, Mr. Mayor, because I didn't hear Councillor Scandrett ask for a dissenting vote.
I have said that all of his votes will be recorded.
Mr. Mayor, I think he's frozen.
He might be frozen.
He's just not there.
Is there some form of movie called that, I think?
It looks to be a technical issue on his end.
Okay, then we won't record Councillor Scandrett as we think he's frozen. We will move on to 16.5, minutes of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Advisory Committee held on Friday, 20th of March. Do we have a mover?
Yes, Councillor Nelson and Councillor Markwart, or Councillor Markwart and Councillor Nelson.
Okay, we'll go Nelson. Councillors Nelson and Markwart moved it and seconded it.
Question.
Question, Councillor Turl.
Page 351, the General Manager's
We're
notice.
on 300.
351.
Councillor Turley.
The General Manager says she had a significant non-pecuniary interest and removed herself from the meeting. But it would seem that the Deputy General Manager for Finance and Risk stayed within that meeting in the second paragraph halfway down. Possibly he should have removed himself as well, because what's happened is somebody has informed.
What's the question?
Well, the question is, it goes on to say it was agreed by the committee that it was unable to undertake a forensic audit on this project. Well, where is that in writing from somewhere under the code of the meeting practice for that committee? The guidelines.
Well,
it's all been hearsay. It's hearsay because
it was a statement.
What is the terms of references from the audit and risk?
The chair of the committee determines the position of that committee, and the committee chair said that felt that it was not in their guidelines.
No, that's not correct. If you read the paragraph, it says the chair requests that a report come back to council to the Audit and Risk and Improvement Committee, noting that the issue arises from relating to the Berrimah Overpass project and
yes, and that will be done, Councillor Turl.
No, it's not, because if you read further down, it's not going to be happened, because then
Councillor Turl, can I get Ms.
does
Linda,
not recommend the approval. It is clear in the first paragraph. They've requested
Councillor Turl,
overruled it.
You have trouble with comprehending what was said. It was said the committee will not do a forensic examination, but they want to be brought back to the committee the improvements that have been made by the staff in relation to these projects. That's my understanding. I was there.
The chair requests a report come back to the Audit and Risk and Improvement Committee.
Yes.
Noting the issues that are raised.
Yes, noting the
in relation
issues.
to the Berrimah Overpass.
Look, I'm not going to get into a debate on that. I am telling you.
Well, you just have to read the last sentence, Mr. Mayor. As the mover of the item, the last sentence says the committee also noted that undertaking a forensic audit is not part of the committee's remit, and to do so would to set a precedent for other councillor projects. You've got to read the whole thing, not just take out one sentence.
You can't take a page out of a book and call it the facts.
What is the guidelines in relation to the Eastern Risk and Audit guidelines? That's what I'm trying to ask as well. I mean,
then why don't you just ask that?
You've got the first paragraph asking for a report, and then the bottom saying you can't do it without any confirmation that it doesn't comply. Would you allow Councillor Nelson to break in the debate? You allow Councillor Nelson, but you won't.
Mr. Mayor, we will send all councillors
a
copy of the Audit, Risk and Continuous Improvement Charter.
Right, yes, I was going to say that. Right, you can put him back on. Now, the General Manager has said she will send to all councillors a copy of the charter, of the guidelines for the Risk and Audit Committee, right? But do not speak over the chair, otherwise I will mute you, any councillor, again. Okay.
You have no right. One. No.
A terrible look.
Now, I am going to put the recommendation.
Just quickly, I've heard from Councillor Scandrett, he has a power outage.
Okay, Councillor Scandrett has a blackout. Obviously, there's no backup. So I put the recommendation. All in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hands. Okay.
Against.
Councillor against, Councillor Earl. 17.1. Questions with notice, mayoral use of a microphone in meetings. Somebody like to move the recommendation? Move Councillor Markwart, seconded Councillor Nelson. I put the recommendation.
No. I want you to read the response, Council. The Code of Meeting Practice does not contain.
Then I am the chair and I set the rules as I'm chairing the meeting, and I will continue to use.
You have no right to use a gag button. It is not in the Code of Meeting Practice.
I am the chair. If you do not like it, there is a procedure you can follow, Councillor Turland.
I will. It's clear you do not have the right to use a code.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Point of order. This is crazy.
I will mute you or I will rule you out of order, and if you continually interrupt the chair.
I was debating. You kept on interrupting me as I started to debate.
Councillor Turland,
recommendation.
You will be expelled from this meeting if you keep arguing the way you do. So it's your call. You wish to be expelled or you wish to be part of the meeting. There is a response from the Office of Local Government that will be discussed in closed, which make the few actions of councillors very, very clear. I put the recommendation. All in favour? Please raise your hand. Carry. Those against?
Against.
Councillor Turl. 17.2. Station Street upgrade. Now, if Councillor Scandrett's not here, I would suggest that unless somebody wants to, well, it's a question, so there's no need for a debate, that the question be noted. Somebody like to move it? Councillor Markwart and McLaughlin. Any discussion? I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. All in favour. Those against? Councillor Russell is the only dissenting vote. 3. Question with notice. Angelo Penrose tree removal. Councillor Turland appears to have left the meeting.
He's turned his video off, Mr.
Mayor.
He's turned his video off.
Okay. Councillor, we move in relation to 17.3. Somebody like to move it? Be noted. Move Councillor Andrews. Seconded Councillor Markwart. Any discussion? Before you put it, I would like to say that the work will be done expeditiously as possible because of the concern on these trees. How many? I think it's a worthwhile expenditure of the monies that came from the federal government. Put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare it carried. Question with question 17.4. Letter from the members of the WSC Heritage Committee re Station Street. Somebody like to move the recommendation?
I'll move it.
Who was that?
Me.
Oh, Councillor Turland and Councillor Nelson. I put it. All in favour, please raise your hand. Can't see your hand, Councillor Turland.
I can't help that.
Okay.
Say yes.
Say yes. Yes or no?
Well, I moved the thing.
Yeah, right. Well, you still got to vote in favour of it, so I'll accept that as an affirmative. Carried unanimously. We move to 18.1, Notice of Motion Appreciation Mittagong Airfield. Councillor Turland.
Moved. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Seconder, Councillor Nelson. Would you like to speak to a Councillor Turland?
No.
Right. Okay. I've put it, keep your hand there so I know if you're voting or not. All in favour, please raise your hands. Those against, carried unanimously except for Councillor Scandrett.
I'm about to readmit Councillor Scandrett.
Councillor Scandrett will be coming online in a minute. 18.2, notice of motion, regular update on compliance activities. Councillor Turland, welcome back, Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry there was a power failure here at our farm.
It happens out there in the wilderness.
It does, as only farmer, it happens too often.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah, I know. I ended up paying the bills eventually.
Intention to place an order.
Notice of motion, regular update on compliance activities.
Just a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Do we have a mover? Do we have Councillor? Yeah, do we have a seconder? Councillor McLaughlin.
Question,
well,
please.
It's been moved and seconded, so it is now open for debate or comment. Councillor Nelson, question.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was just seeking some sort of clarification whether, rather than item number 2 be included, that this item come back as a separate report in closed committee.
I'll take advice from the General Manager. Madam General Manager.
Yes, I believe it should be as part of the legal reporting confidential if it's talking about action against people who may have deviated from our regulations.
Yeah, look,
okay.
Can I make a comment? And that is fair enough, if you wish to know, but I raised the same point that Councillor Turland raised many years ago when I was first on council. And I had a very experienced councillor say to me, how would you be if you were running a restaurant and you had gold stars for 15 years of operation, and somehow after a health inspection check or whatever, you were deemed to have rat droppings in your kitchen? Would you want your name to be, after you'd had all those years of high class, first class grade results, to be publicly then made available? And I thought, well, no, I really wouldn't. So what we have to be aware of, even the people who are being investigated may be either totally ignorant, they may be an oversight, and as such, on the first instance, I think it should come in a closed manner to council rather than in open. As for the investigations where people are found guilty or non-complying, then, or for reasons that councillors should know, then maybe. But in the first instance, to council in closed session. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Hang on, I'll just click. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I second this motion because I think I agree with what you said, but a lot of the times we're in the dark and then we find out about a prosecution that's gone on that we were not aware of as councillors, that we might have been concerned about or didn't have any knowledge of, and then people ring us up. So I think it's important that we understand that, you know, what is actually happening in that regard so that we can be aware of it. So I think it's important that Councillor Turland's motion here is supported. I think probably in confidential is the proper way to go, as the General Manager suggested. But even though I take your point about, you know, good conduct over many years, but if someone is found to be not doing the right thing, and if it's going to the magistrate's court or whatever, it's public anyway, I think it's only reasonable that council be made aware, councillors be made aware of that compliance issues. Thank you.
There's a long, okay. Would you consider inserting to, in the first instance, to the in confidential?
That's what it's got.
It's got there. All right, okay.
There's that.
In the legal report goes to confidential anyway, so the intent is fine to put those words in. But may I now speak to the reasons why I put this forward?
Yes, wherever you are, Councillor Turland, I don't know where you.
I have no idea why you can't see my ugly head, but I am here watching yours.
Mr. Mayor. Well, I take I have a very good head, Councillor Turland.
We can see the desk. We can see your desk. We can't see your face, Councillor.
Well, I can see you just now, Councillor McLaughlin, with your tie on.
Yeah, but we can't see you.
Yeah, well, I can't. Anyway, let me go. We've got 5 minutes to go and we'll all be done and dusted. The issue is, as you said, Councillor McLaughlin, it gets to the point of what happens, and we find out after the event when Channel 9 turns up in Current Affair and says there's a problem. Yeah. We need to know what's going on. For instance, Maroolba Road fence, it went on forever. We didn't know that happened. That went to the local court until the people that were affected told us, because council knew they were going there, the staff, but we didn't know. And there's multiple cases like that. I could go through probably half a dozen. So we need to know what's in front of us before it actually goes to the system, because we might have a voice on it and not just let the council staff dictate what they think is fair and reasonable. It's the council laws that are representing the community and the public, and we need to know. As for the so-called rat droppings in a kitchen, if you read the New South Wales Health Act now, you have 3 points, I believe, and then it becomes public anyway after the health inspection. So that shouldn't be an issue now in today, because the New South Wales Health Department will actually list it on an open web page anyway.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor Turland. Times have changed since I was given that comment, so I'd probably use another one. But I think you've made your point. Any Councillor Mark Ward, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to add that basically I'm perfectly happy to let things go to come to light that are operational matters. If someone contacts me, I have no problem contacting council, getting an explanation or further information. I don't wish to know everything that is done operationally by this council.
Thank you, Councillor Markward. Any other speakers? Then I put the recommendation. All in favour, please say, raise your hand. Councillors Andrews, Whipper, McLaughlin and Nelson and Scandrett. I declare it.
Well, I put my hand up and you can't see it apparently.
There, I declare it carried.
Councillor Turland, just sorry.
Mr. Mayor.
Before we go on, yeah, Councillor Scandrett.
Mr. Mayor, I obviously was not able to hear my questions with notice there. That
they were all noted.
Yes, so I had a comment to make on one of them.
No, we can't go back. If you wish to make further comment, then resubmit.
I'll resubmit them to what, today's meeting?
Well,
we haven't got guidance for this.
I'll leave it to you, Councillor Scandrett. We are in the middle of a meeting. It'll have no effect on the outcome of tonight's meeting. So
I'll relodge them for next meeting, Mr. Mayor, with your permission.
I'm not giving any permission on anything, Councillor Scandrett. You are the councillor who is to make a decision whether you relodge or not. Can I ask Mr. Crawford to make comment in relation to Councillor, in relation to councillors
Councillor Turlin,
participating.
it appears that you've now turned your camera off, but you had managed to flip your camera around to rear view. If you look on a screen there, you can touch the camera. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, notice of motion 18.3, page 369, Milton Park information session. Move Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Nelson. I don't think it needs any introduction. We've got a bit further to go and we've got closed session and it's 7 o'clock.
So, just put the motion, Mr. Mayor. I think everyone knows what it's about. I'm happy.
Somebody got the hand up.
Well, I'm going to put my hand up and say that the public are entitled to know what it is about, and therefore we need an introduction on it.
Okay, you have the right to speak to Councillor McLaughlin, but Councillor Andrews, you have a question first.
No, I'd like, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Scandred. I'd like to know what the purpose of the so-called information session, what it's about before I determine the way I feel on it.
Yes, Councillor McLaughlin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This was to go, as it says, to a meeting earlier on. I spoke to the General Manager with regard to some concerns with the hotel and the villa people and the developer, and there were some issues there. They had come in to speak to the Mayor with regard to that, but not all parties were invited and one didn't want to come. Basically, I spoke to the GM, as I said. I was going to get those interested parties together to speak with staff. The General Manager concluded that the best way to deal with this was for all councillors to be aware of this heritage item, some of the concerns that are going on. They're under difficulty out there, as we all understand, going forward. It just fleshes out some of the problems that have been associated with developments that have been going forward. I don't want to speak to them in the actual, some of the concerns, but I think the villa owners, the hotel who are suffering with imposts on them need to be able to present to council some of their concerns for us to hear and see if we can resolve some of the problems associated out there. And this was put in place, and I did have the support of Councillor Halstead on this, because he was the planner back in the time when this was proposed and how it would go forward. Now, the subdivision of the property has caused some of these concerns, and there are illegal easements. There are all sorts of, it's a complex problem, and I think the best way to flesh out this is to hear from all and sundry at an information session where we can hear from all the people operating out there to see how we move forward to, move forward so that we can alleviate some of the problems if we can. So it's only an information session. I'm not asking for DAs to be removed. They're all done and dusted. So don't get the wrong idea. This is not about that. It's just to hear some of the concerns and see if we can solve them.
Okay. Councillor Andrews, you've got to let him off.
To support this, providing, and Councillor McLaughlin made it very clear, and he used the term all parties several times.
Yes.
That the owners of Milton Park, the developer, and
yes,
the current 2011 Village 2, which is well underway, that they must, in my opinion, be invited as well. If we're going to
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll there's many things I can talk on, and
Thank you.
The fact that it was listed as a heritage listed item, it's not. So I'm happy. You're happy to accept that.
Okay, no cross talking, please. Let one speak.
Sorry.
Now, just before we go on, Mr. Crawford.
Deputy Mayor has left the meeting.
Oh, Councillor Turland has left the meeting.
It's a shame.
Councillor Scandred.
So, Mr. Mayor, may I ask the mover and seconder, what actually is this designed to achieve other than a whole lot of people telling us all their grievances as such? Would he like to give us the idea of how it will go forward?
Councillor McLaughlin, I think he just explained it all.
I think he did too, and I think the fact that if there's a number of people that have a number of grievances, maybe it's council's responsibility to listen to them.
That's all I'm asking.
Councillor Mark Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm supporting Councillor McLaughlin here. I think it'd be useful for councillors to make a decision once and for all and put this on a track, because this comes backwards and forwards and it's been around for as long as I've been on council. I'd like to see the issue resolved and put to bed. I have no idea of the outcome, but I certainly support this one last time to get this on a track.
Yeah, I think there is, I'll support it and respect that there's got to be closure. People have got to accept what is there, why it happened, because there's going to be ping pong forever, as Councillor Mark Ward has pointed out. But may I say that this is the last roll of the dice in relation to everybody being able to air their grievances, because as Councillor McLaughlin has pointed out, the DA has been issued. It cannot be stopped unless somebody with $100 million wishes to take them on. But I'll support it. Let's organise it when it's appropriate. Get people in, hear both sides, and hopefully, as Councillor McLaughlin said, come some resolution and working in a conductive way.
So just a qualification, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Qualification.
And that is, I see in the motion that's on the screen, interested parties that own property in the vicinity. Does that also involve any people who are in leases in property in the vicinity?
Look, I think we'll just let the staff work through.
We'll sort that out.
We'll sort that out. We're not going to
that detail.
Don't keep walking, trying to talk over me. We are not going to get into that detail tonight. I'll put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. Carried unanimously. Notice of motion, deferred heritage items. Councillor moved, Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Nelson. Discussion, anything to be said? Then I put it, all in favour, please raise your hand.
Well, I'm uncomfortable with the word progress.
Then we've just put it and it's been carried. We move to 18.5, notice of motion, postponement of council meeting. Well, I think that's now a little bit outdated. I think it should be just moved and noted.
Happy to move that way, Mr. Mayor.
Secondly, Councillor Scandrett, that it be noted. Put it, all in favour. Please raise your hand. Against, carried. Notice of motion 18.6, Old South Road costing. Well, I think the comment from staff says it all. It's going to happen. Well done to the staff for getting the money. So I think it should just be noted.
Yep. Mr. Mayor, if I may, as the question asker.
Yes.
My actual question is, that's great about the safer roads and black spots, Mr. Mayor, but my question actually talks about the whole length of there, is because it's obviously carrying a lot of traffic these days from people trying to avoid our towns and get right up to the north. So yes, that's a great report, but doesn't actually go to what I say there. A major upgrade, such project to refer to current growing traffic, roads and likely loads, new population and the like.
You can bet your bottom dollar, Councillor Scandrett, that the staff will continue to seek funding to, if it's needed, to complete the entire 21, whatever, no, it's not 12 kilometres. it is going to be a major start, and they're getting on with the job. It'll be commenced next year. So,
Mr. Mayor, that's great, but I'm asking that it become a formal project that we can get shovel ready. That's what this is about, not the safety improvements.
That's what
I'll move an amendment.
Doing design work now to get it ready.
I'll take that on board, Mr. Nelson, Councillor Nelson. And that is, I'll move the motion that council commence planning for a major shovel-ready project.
I'll
move an amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, can we just move that the recommendation be noted?
I'll move that way.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Well, I think the people are very happy with what I've got.
Stop interrupting. I've moved that it be noted.
Yes, thank you, and everyone. You know, we might be on Zooming, but have the decorum of meeting manners. I put the recommendation as moved by councillors. I can't see.
Can't see it.
And McLaughlin.
Mr. Mayor.
That it be noted. No. It moved that it be noted. It's where is it up there? Is it up there? Yeah. Move that it be noted. Put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand.
No.
Carried with councillor.
My objection.
Dissenting a vote.
My objection.
Yes, I know it's being noted. 18.7, notice of motion, staff removed from council meetings. Again, the comment from staff to me is the answer. So it should be noted. Somebody
I'll move it. It's noted.
Move that be noted.
I'll second that.
Mark Wharton Nelson. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Scandron.
Mr. Mayor, this was in relation to the fact that the staff did leave a meeting, but Deputy General Manager Barry Paul was left in the meeting, which instead of a note taker, and I think that really constrained discussion that was going to take place in there. I don't think it's that funny.
What I will not allow this sort of commentary to be made.
It's on the record, Mr. Mayor.
So that it was an extraordinary meeting which I called, and the only person I wanted in there was Councillor. It's got nothing to do with this. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Put the recommendation. All in favour, please raise your hand. Carried. I will be asking somebody to move the recommendation that we go into close now. I will just, move Nelson, Councillor Andrews. The guidelines from the OLG are very specific on meetings. And the meetings say where council staff move around in a council meeting, or it should be no longer than 2 minutes. And the council meetings, if people are static, should be no longer than 4 hours. I have read it. We are at 7:10. We have been going since the staff have been in here since 3:15. This has been a big business paper because of all the notices of motion and whatever. We have to try and speed our meetings up. And making commentary for the sake of making commentary under these conditions is not conducive for good council meetings. On saying that, we now have to go into confidential, and it's been moved by Councillors Nelson and Andrews that we go into close. So I'll put it all in favour. Those against, carry. We are